Now, if you were to check out the Sahara from space right now, instead of a barren wasteland, you'd spot a surprising sight. Dry land sprinkled with some lakes and rivers in Morocco and Algeria, all thanks to some heavy rains in early September 2024. These aren't oases. This is just the Sahara going back to the factory settings. Believe it or not, eons ago, one of the biggest deserts on Earth was actually a lush paradise full of greenery. Let's first see how the Sahara turned into a desert. During the last ice age, Earth was much colder, and big ice sheets covered a lot of the land. At that time, the Sahara Desert was significantly bigger than it is today, and on our planet there were fewer tropical forests. And the cooler temperatures changed how rain was distributed in the tropics. Now, normally, warm air rises in the tropics, which helps create rain. Since it was colder during the Ice Age, this system got, messed up, and less rain fell in some areas. This caused more dry and desert-like conditions in places that are usually wetter. There was also a lot of dust blowing around in the Sahara Desert, which scientists found in old ocean sediments. But about 12,500 years ago, something surprising happened. The dust levels went way down. This meant that the Sahara got a lot wetter, which is a sign that the climate suddenly warmed up for a while before cooling down again. After 12,500 years ago, the Sahara became a much greener place, like a savanna, because a weather pattern called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a mouthful indeed, moved north during summer. This wet period was at its best around 4,000 years ago, when temperatures were a bit warmer than today. At that time, more rain fell in the Ethiopian highlands, which made the Nile River carry more sediment. However, there was another big change called a Heinrich event, which caused the Intertropical Convergence Zone to move back south. This led to the Sahara and Arabian regions drying out quickly. Because of this, the Nile River had much less flooding between 2700 and 2100 BCE. Long story short, too late for that. The Sahara has gone through wet and dry cycles due to changes in the climate and weather patterns over thousands of years. Up until recently, we've known about the Sahara in its dry era. But in September 2024, an unusual cyclone rolled through. It hit Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and filled those dry lakes and rivers. The satellite images from NASA of before and after the rains are stunning. It's like the Sahara has had a makeover. Some areas in North Africa received up to 8 inches of rain. For comparison, Seattle gets about 40 inches per year, only 5 times what the Sahara received. I say only for one simple reason. Seattle has a reputation for being quite rainy, while the Sahara does not. The tricky part is those 8 inches. Essentially, the entire yearly quota for this area fell in a matter of moments. So, in a way, it might have felt rainier in the Sahara than in Seattle. The mountains funnel the water into ephemeral lakes in northern Algeria, which recently expanded to over 70 square miles and reached depths of more than 7 feet. That's enough water to sustain it for a year. So what exactly are these ephemeral lakes? Well, they're basins that fill up for a short time each year, but might stay dry for several years if the rain doesn't cooperate. Sometimes water flows into them from a small surrounding area, or it can just be good old-fashioned rain. Now, a big question arises. How come these lakes exist in the first place? Well, generally they form because there's excess water trapped on the surface. But the soil in the Sahara is incredibly dry. Shouldn't it act like a sponge? It must be thirsting for moisture. Well, think about how eagerly your potted plant drinks up water when you return home from a vacation. However, no matter how parched it is, dry soil can only absorb a limited amount of water, which is often quite small. And just like your potted plant, it doesn't necessarily drink it all. You might simply be overwatering. Or, if you check the saucer below, you could find a mini flood. Another significant factor preventing the soil from absorbing water is the lack of vegetation. Under normal conditions, trees, shrubs, and various plants help retain moisture. In the desert, however, it's nearly impossible. There may be a few palm trees, but that's about it. This also explains the formation of those temporary lakes. Precipitation that isn't held by plants accumulates in low-lying valleys and depressions, creating these fleeting bodies of water. These lakes may only last for a limited time, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't have names. For instance, the beautiful lake adorned with swaying palms that you see is called Lake Yasmina, located in the oasis town of Merzoga. In certain areas of the desert, where the dunes rise, it may appear as though you're looking at a mirage, but it's not. The sand dunes are partially covered by water. Remember how I mentioned 8 inches? Well, that's not entirely accurate for some regions. In fact, there are places where the flooding is so extensive that the palms are submerged up to their crowns. Now, the last time we saw a downpour this intensive was 30 to 50 years ago. But this rain is more than welcome. After 6 consecutive years of drought, Morocco really needed it. Lakes that had been dry for decades, like Lake Ariki, are finally getting some much-needed water. A recent analysis revealed that out of the hundreds of storms that have hit the region since 2000, only 6 brought enough rain to start filling up this lake. And of those, only 2 resulted in a lake level higher than what we saw in September 2024. So while this torrential rain seems like a blessing, the big question is, will it last? The answer is yes. When humid air from near the equator meets the hot, dry air from the north, the Sahara Desert tends to get more rain. Scientists say this collision zone is shifting further north as the planet warms, and it warms, so it's likely to keep moving that way over the next couple of decades. So I seem a bit overly optimistic about this, and the truth is, the news isn't entirely positive. The reality is that no one was truly prepared for a flood situation like this. Moreover, remember that this isn't some Southeast Asian country where people are accustomed to dealing with water. This is the bone-dry Sahara. That said, I think you know what I'm getting at. Tragically, at least 18 people lost their lives to the intense rains in southern Morocco. The authorities are gearing up for even more heavy rain in the region. But if that's the case, could it mean the Sahara is facing extinction? And what would that even mean for us? It might sound a bit strange, but our planet actually relies on deserts, and the Sahara is no different. At first glance, it may seem like a barren wasteland, and it's nothing to write home about. But deserts play a crucial role in our ecosystem. They act as major carbon storage sites and are considered net carbon sinks, with the Sahara alone holding an estimated 1 trillion metric tons of carbon. In the fight against climate change, these existing deserts are like a buffer, helping to keep the temperatures within acceptable levels. Yeah, deserts are scorching hot, but they act as the world's air conditioning. Plus, desert sands are an unexpected source of nutrients for lush areas like tropical rainforests. Believe it or not, scientists have found that the sand particles from the Sahara have a hand in nurturing the Amazon rainforest. These particles travel across the Atlantic Ocean, riding the winds all the way to South America, where they enrich the soil in the Amazon basin. Without the Sahara, experts believe the Amazon rainforest could face serious collapse.
If you've ever driven over the Rocky Mountains, you've probably seen road signs for the Continental Divide, the backbone of North America. All watersheds to the west of it run into the Pacific Ocean, and everything on its eastern slope goes straight into the Atlantic. There's just one creek in Wyoming that couldn't choose one side and drains into both oceans at the same time. Two Ocean Creek begins its journey high up in the Teton Range. The snow-capped peaks provide the perfect backdrop as the creek starts its descent, winding its way through alpine meadows and dense forests. As the creek continues its course, it gets to the Two Ocean Pass. This is the geographical crossroads where the creek splits into 2 branches, the Atlantic Creek and Pacific Creek. The Pacific Creek goes westward and becomes part of the larger Snake River watershed, bringing its waters to the Snake River, which eventually merges with the Columbia River and, finally, reaches the Pacific Ocean. The Atlantic Creek heads eastward and flows into the Yellowstone, Missouri, and Mississippi rivers, and eventually empties into the Gulf of Mexico. If you connect the 2 creeks' watersheds on a map, you'll get a single blue line between Oregon and Louisiana. Explorers struggling to find the Northwest Passage between the two oceans never knew they could have used the creek. They would just have to use really tiny boats. Some scientists believe that cutthroat trout had better luck in that way. They managed to migrate from the Snake River to Yellowstone River, most likely using the Two-Ocean Creek. Technically, fish can travel over 6,000 miles to cover the whole distance from sea to shining sea in fresh water. The creek could be just perfect for that journey. There are hiking trails in Grand Teton National Park that lead to Two-Ocean Pass. If you feel adventurous enough, you can stand at the literal crossroads of the continent and see the beginning of two aquatic journeys. Lonar Lake in India popped up literally out of nowhere around 52,000 years ago. Newer data says it could be much older, probably over 500,000 years. At first, scientists were sure that the lake was in an ancient crater of a long-extinct volcano. But then, geologists made a detailed analysis of the soil and water and found out that Lonar Lake has a space origin. The minerals found in its soil are similar to those found in moon rocks brought to Earth during the Apollo program. The lake is an impact crater left by a huge meteorite, which was almost 6 times heavier than the Empire State Building. The impact was so strong that the volcanic rock melted and turned into glass. In 2020, the lake, which was already unusual enough, suddenly turned pink. It wasn't a part of an early Barbie movie marketing campaign. The detailed analysis showed that the water contained an increased level of unique microbes. They accumulate on the surface and emit some pink pigment. After a while, the microbes settled to the bottom and the lake became transparent again. Flamingos that got their food from the lake also got to taste some of the microbes and became an even brighter shade of pink than usual. One of the most famous sights of Yellowstone National Park is the Grand Prismatic Spring. It's one of the largest springs in the world, and it's inspired people who have seen it since at least the 19th century. Back then, a group of trappers mentioned an indigo blue lake boiling like a huge cauldron. Decades later, expeditions came to the spring to study it better and explain its unusual appearance. But because the spring at its widest point is longer than an American football field, they had to build a special vessel and travel far from the shore. The scientists traveling in the boat never wore life vests. They knew those would be useless if the boat tipped over. The water in the middle of the spring is of near boiling temperature, and those vibrant colors are the result of extreme organisms living in the hot water. The temperature changes as you travel away from the center. Different species that don't mind the heat have settled in different parts of the pool, giving it its famous diverse pigments. Back in the early 20th century, someone got the interesting idea to try to irrigate a part of Nevada's Black Rock Desert. They drilled a well and found lots of water, but it was near boiling temperature. The water was clearly not good for agriculture, so the human-made geyser was left abandoned. Over the decades, it slowly turned into an impressive cone of calcium carbonate deposits. Then, in 1964, a geothermal energy company drilled another well close to the first one. The water they had found was of the same temperature. This time, it wasn't hot enough for their needs to produce energy, so they decided to cap the well and leave. But water managed to get up and out, and it completely dried up the first geyser. The second one, which got the name Fly Geyser, is still flowing burning hot water rich in minerals. The cone is multicolored and looks like it's not from this planet, thanks to the algae living in it, which love the heat. Every summer, Cano Cristales in Colombia turns into a liquid rainbow, or the River of Five Colors. At this time, and until the end of fall, the conditions are just right for the riverbed to turn bright red, yellow, green, blue, and black. We owe this beauty to certain aquatic plants growing in the river, a special type of riverweed. During the wet season, the river moves fast and the sun cannot get to these plants. During the dry season, there isn't enough water to feed them, so the time in between the seasons has the perfect conditions for this colorful show. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. At some point, the number of tourists who wanted to see it became so huge that scientists got concerned it could be bad for this hotspot of biodiversity. The area is home to rare species of animals, birds, and plants. Now, there are ecotourism trails and strict opening hours. In August 2014, a man in Tunisia was going back home from the north after doing his business. It was a hot summer evening, and he was dreaming about water, when suddenly, it popped up right in front of him. There was a whole lake in the middle of the desert, and the man was pretty sure it hadn't been there several days before. The new body of water got the nickname Mysterious Lake, and actually became a great mystery. Hundreds of people came here to swim in the clear, cool water. The lake became a popular place, but a few days later, the water turned dark green. The locals didn't care about this and continued to bathe in the lake. But when scientists and geologists arrived at the place, they announced that the water was dangerous to swim in. The lake was stagnating. It didn't refresh itself from underground streams, and the rains didn't feed it either. That's why the water became moldy and dirty. The lake contained algae and a lot of harmful bacteria dangerous to the human body. Scientists also found out that the land in this region had phosphate deposits. This substance can decay. But even that didn't stop people from bathing in the lake in the middle of the desert. How it got there remains a mystery. Some experts think that heavy rains have filled a hole in the ground with water. Another, more popular theory says that an earthquake had formed the lake. The seismic activity must have torn the Earth's crust above the water table, and then underground springs had filled the crevice. So, in theory, the lake could drain back out one day, just as suddenly as it had appeared.
Scientists claim that Icelandia was a region between Greenland and Scandinavia that was more than 230,000 square miles, but is now underwater. The Earth was once a large pizza pie, with all the continents connected to each other millions of years ago, otherwise known as Pangaea. The North Atlantic region we know today was dry land from about 335 million to 175 million years ago. For many years, scientists and geologists assumed that the North Atlantic Ocean was birthed as Pangaea began to split apart roughly 200 million years ago. With volcanoes in the region where Iceland is, the country came to be just 60 million years ago as it broke off and sailed away from all the other lands. And since the Earth was like a large pizza pie, it divided like one. Many of the lands split up into many large and small pieces, creating the continents we know today. But this new theory suggests that the result of Pangaea's splitting left out some land that stretched for around 200 miles. And just about 10 million years ago, that piece of land submerged in the waters on the eastern and western side, leaving the tip of the land, which is now Iceland. When plate tectonics move, they grind on each other, which gave shape to our current landscape, all thanks to the mantle. This new radical theory goes against everything written in history books and what scientists have been studying. They began shaking heads, drawing lots of skepticism and criticism. But by analyzing the ocean floor under Iceland and the Earth's crust, we can assume that this idea isn't far-fetched. The crust beneath Iceland happens to be a lot thicker than the typical ones. Oceanic crust is made up of unique melted rocks compared to the land crusts where we walk and live on, and is a lot more denser. The thinnest layer on Earth is the crust, where life takes place. It's essential for water, growing food, gathering natural resources and minerals, and breathing in oxygen. It sinks below to the bottom, but right above the Earth's mantle. It also refreshes itself, since it constantly gets recycled into the mantle and back up. This is why the rocks in the oceanic crust are around 25 miles thick, compared to just 5 miles anywhere else. This is also reasonable given that it's in a hotspot for volcanoes. Magnetic surveys of the ocean floor show layers of molten crust in stripe patterns. Also, given the fact that the Earth's magnetic field changed its polarity over millions of years, it played a role in shaping the foundation of our landscape. but there isn't any concrete evidence to prove this new theory just yet. One of the first steps is to start digging the ocean floor near Iceland. Zircon is a very sturdy mineral that can last for billions of years despite erosion in the Earth's crust. By taking samples and studying them, researchers can estimate the geological age of the continents. This will make sure the crust is oceanic, which is thicker, or continental, which is the regular crust we walk on. This isn't an overnight project and would come with a hefty cost. Another way is to do seismic surveys that can measure echoes conducted on research ships. Drilling holes miles deep in the crust can also help with the research, but this would cost more than studying the zircon minerals. Some fossilized plants unique to both Scandinavia and Greenland might prove that Icelandia was once on the surface and possibly scattered with trees. It wasn't a cold land as it is today, so it may have had forests. But scientists still haven't found fossil evidence of animals common in both lands to suggest anything. But maybe time will tell. The theory goes deeper, which suggests that there was a greater Icelandia. With Iceland, Ireland, Britain, Scandinavia, and Greenland all in one microcontinent, it could be a destination of winter enthusiasts and great for skiing. It could be possible to connect Canada to Greater Icelandia by train over the ocean, which would open up the economy even more. Iceland is around 40,000 square miles, which is already quite big. And if the Greater Icelandia was present today, then Europe would be a completely different continent. Many theories are circulating about other possible hidden microcontinents around the world. Scientists aren't certain of the possibility of Icelandia's existence, but if all the studies conducted were done correctly, then the theory could change everything we know about Iceland and the North Atlantic Ocean. And this could pave the way for other sunken microcontinents around the world. Another theory out there is that New Zealand was the tip of a lost subcontinent, even bigger than Icelandia, called Zealandia. Studies show that it's separated from the supercontinent Gondwana between 79 to 83 million years ago. Scientists claim that it's the thinnest and youngest continent discovered underwater. Craton is a core rock that acts as the main foundation for most continents. It's at least 1 billion years old, but the continental crust that makes up Zealandia is just half of that, which makes it quite young. That means some craton is missing, even though it holds some leftovers of older rocks and parts of the mantle. They're estimated to be as old as 2.7 billion years old. Scientists did some studies on the zircon crystals from New Zealand and found out that they're as old as 1.3 billion years old. The rest of the continents are more than 3 billion years old. Scientists studied the composition of the rocks in the bottom of the ocean around New Zealand. They're made up of silica and granite, which are found in continental crusts. The ocean floors mainly have magnesium and iron-rich rocks. They're also thicker and higher than regular ocean crusts around it. They conducted some studies and collected magnetic and topographic data to see the link between the Tasman and Coral Seas in the Cano Trough region. This is the narrow strip between Zealandia and Australia. Satellite data tracked tiny faults in the Earth's gravity to map out the crust of the ocean floor surrounding the area. They saw the mass that makes up Zealandia quite visible and almost the size of Australia. Even though the signs are there, this doesn't prove anything. It's possible that there are a bunch of microcontinents which all split apart when Australia broke free of Gondwana. Back then, the supercontinent was made up of South America, Antarctica, Australia, Zealandia, Arabia, and the Indian subcontinent. New Zealand is already not the biggest country out there, but if the theories are correct, then Zealandia will be 6 times its original size. Mauritius is a young island that's only a few million years old. Just 1,200 miles off the coast of Africa, it's believed that the tiny island came to life around 9 million years ago. The underwater volcanoes in the region spewed out so much lava that it formed the land today. But scientists found zircon rocks that are more than 3 billion years old. It may also be part of a continent submerged underwater called Mauritia, which is just a quarter of the size of Madagascar. The zircons they found were embedded in solid rocks and not just in the sand, which may rule out that they just washed up on shore from another continent. Some scientists are still not convinced. They suggest that discovering rocks that stand out from the other typical ones brought by an eruption could skew the scientific community to this theory. But just like how Icelandia could be part of Greater Icelandia, Mauritia was once called Rodinia, which consisted of India and Madagascar. Theories suggest that Mauritia was covered in water when India broke away from Madagascar, something like 85 million years ago.
A mega drought might hit Australia soon, and this isn't just about a couple of dry seasons. We're talking about 20 years of little or no rain. While Australia could be facing the longest and most devastating drought since official records began, the rest of the world might struggle to buy bread, flour, or cereals. Energy prices are likely to spike globally, and neighboring countries like New Zealand, Indonesia, and Malaysia must be prepared to receive Australians directly affected by the lack of water. To truly understand how severe this situation could become, we should first examine past disasters. First off, Australia is no stranger to droughts, and this phenomenon can happen across their entire territory. From 2017 to 2019, the southeast part of the country went through what they call the tinderbox drought. This was a severe bone-dry event where the cooler months saw only about half the usual rainfall. Parts of Australia became so dry that wildfires were a constant threat. Crops failed, and water was scarce. This drought was also thought to have contributed to the Black Summer fire disaster. By the end of 2019, bushfires were raging across the country on a scale never seen before, with people describing them as rivers of lava flowing down from treetops. The losses were staggering. The tourist industry alone took a hit of $2.8 billion, and over 7,000 jobs disappeared as a result of this difficult period. The tinderbox drought was a big reminder of what Australia might face in the future. That's why it's so important to understand what happened in the past to get a full picture of a possible 20-year mega drought. But there is one problem. Even though droughts are relatively common in Australia, the rainfall data available until today isn't enough for researchers to predict the future, and our records only go back to around 1900. So experts decided to study tree rings to uncover missing environmental data. If you look at a tree stump, you'll notice concentric rings on its surface. As trees grow, they form new rings, and the thickness of these rings depends on how much water they get. During a mega drought, the rings appear thinner because the trees don't have much water. Unfortunately, these natural records usually only go back a few hundred years, and it only tells us about specific local conditions, not the situation across all of Australia. So, experts turn to computer models to simulate how Earth's climate changed from the year 850 to 2000. This approach helped them to paint a picture of when megadroughts might have occurred in Australia and how to predict what might happen in the future. But what they were really interested in was whether the human factor might be making this scenario worse over the years and if we are somehow intensifying these dry periods. So, are we to blame for these megadroughts? The short answer is, we're not sure yet. On one hand, dry periods in Australia do seem to last longer than they did before factories and machines became common. On the other hand, they don't seem to be getting more intense or happening more often than before industrial times. This means a drought lasting 20 years might not be directly linked to human activities. Actually, this kind of phenomenon is just a normal part of how rainfall changes in Australia over time. This is backed up by evidence from ice cores, which suggests that a 39-year drought hit eastern Australia around 800 years ago. What makes it all so fascinating is that there isn't just one cause for this phenomenon. I mean, there is no single mechanism that explains all cases of megadroughts. It happens because the right combination of ocean and atmospheric conditions come together, and you end up with a drought. And just by random chance, you might have periods where there are 100-year-long droughts. Despite what many people think, megadroughts are not geographically isolated. They have occurred on every continent except Antarctica over the past 2,000 years, and are often linked to natural events. For instance, megadroughts in North America and Southwest South America were driven by El Niño, where the Pacific Ocean near the equator gets warmer than usual, disturbing normal weather patterns. They are not rare events either. In fact, the U.S. Southwest has been experiencing a megadrought since 2000. It's being considered the driest period in 1,200 years for the region. Major reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at low levels. Heat waves are hitting cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas harder than ever. And wildfires are happening more frequently as the land gets drier. Now, let's think about the future. Even though we have a very recent and concrete example from the U.S., research can't exactly predict how a 20-year megadrought would play out in Australia. Usually, such events show up mainly as reduced rainfall and snowfall. But in most areas, the increase in drought risk will be caused by a warmer, more arid atmosphere. So the ground will probably look parched and cracked, rivers and lakes will likely shrink, and the sky will be relentlessly clear and blue, with barely a cloud in sight. Farmers might struggle to grow crops, making grocery prices rise worldwide. Things like bread, flour, and cereals may become scarcer, as Australia supplies about 13% of global wheat exports. Coal mines might be affected, as they depend on water for extraction, washing, and processing. That might drive up power costs for industries around the world, which could be passed on to consumers, impacting global growth and inflation. As cities might face water shortages, Australians will likely find new ways to conserve every drop or maybe move to New Zealand or Southeast Asia. Now, you're probably thinking, when is this big event going to happen? Honestly, it's really hard to predict exactly. Megadroughts can happen every 150 to 1,000 years, but experts think Australia should be ready for one to happen in the next 10 years or so. And this possibly should be taken seriously. This phenomenon has been known to contribute to the collapse of entire civilizations. Take the Akkadians of Mesopotamia, who built the world's first empire more than 4,000 years ago. Studies of moisture at the ruins of Akkadian cities suggest that they experienced a massive drought lasting 300 years, and this may have led to their collapse. A similar thing happened to the Assyrian Empire, which existed over 2,700 years ago, in what is now northern Iraq. For years, it was a real mystery why they left their capital of Nineveh and never returned. But recent studies of a stalagmite in the Cunaba cave revealed that the rise and fall of the empire coincided with a wet period followed by a 125-year-long megadrought. Because they were very dependent on seasonal rain for agriculture, this dry period made their life much harder. Even though experts now believe they probably left because of the dryness, the question of where they went is still a mystery. So, yep, megadroughts may have played a role in the collapse of great civilizations in the past. But on the positive side, we've come a long way since then, and recent climate technologies can help us prepare for events like this. Now that we know a 20-year megadrought is very much possible and might happen soon, Australia has some time to get ready for it. Developing strong water management plans to mitigate the severe impacts of a megadrought is more than necessary, and it's also important to create community support networks to provide emotional and financial support to people, particularly farmers, who are more affected directly by this event. If initiatives like these emerge in the coming years, those 20 years of drought could be less intense than most people might expect.
So many asteroids pass through our solar system, and we don't even know about it. Those are rocky pieces of material left over from the time when our solar system was forming, about 4.6 billion years ago. They move around the sun, but not in the way planets do. We're talking about true rebels that prefer to follow some pretty strange paths. Plus, they spin in different ways as they travel between planets and other space objects. And the majority of them come from the main asteroid belt that's located between Jupiter and Mars. Most stay there. But Jupiter has quite a strong gravity, so it can push some of those flying rocks in different directions, and towards us too. They're sometimes round, and sometimes they have odd shapes with pits and holes from all that crashing into other space rocks. As we currently know, there are more than 1 million of them in the main asteroid belt, and that's all good until some of them move in our direction. NASA keeps an eye on them, so we know everything's fine, at least for now. But that wasn't always the case with our beloved home planet. If Earth could talk, it would probably share so many crazy asteroid stories. We're talking about those space rocks that left impact craters we call domes. They have a specific shape with a raised center, similar to when you throw a pebble in a pond and see some water splashing upward. But we'll never be able to learn about many others. I know this raised center sounds like something you're supposed to see right away, especially if an asteroid that once slammed into the surface was big. But we're talking about millions and millions of years of erosion, so wind, water, and even gravity do what they do best and erase traces. They wear down impact domes, and some sites even end up hidden under layers of rock and dirt, or they disappear forever because Earth's tectonic plates keep moving around. Check out the Moon. It's experienced many collisions too, but over there, there's no ocean or tectonic plates moving around, or even wind to slowly, through millions of years, erase craters from its face. Basically, its entire history is written on its surface. But Earth has its own forces that can erase such places as the Vedafort impact structure and the Chicxulub crater. You know, the famous one that wiped out the dinosaurs? Luckily, scientists have new methods to find ancient craters. They often focus on the mess impacts made, which means the materials they threw around. And the Australian continent is especially interesting since we're talking about a playground for asteroid hits. By that, I mean ancient supercontinent Gondwana that dominated the South hundreds of millions of years ago. Experts know about 38 impacts, plus they speculate about 43 more. Some structures are relatively small, while others are big and completely hidden. And recently, a scientist named Tony Yates has discovered strange underground magnetic patterns in New South Wales, Australia. Yay! New clues of a giant asteroid impact! And when I say giant, I really mean it. It's a structure 323 miles in diameter. This might be the largest impact site ever found. This spot is called the Deniliquin structure. Its magnetic patterns show characteristic ripples around the center, like when a rock hits the water. There are also fractures that go outward from the center. And it seems rocks from inside Earth ended up pushed into these fractures. That's a typical story for big asteroid impacts. This structure was probably located in eastern Gondwana hundreds of millions of years ago, way before it split into several continents, including Australia. At the moment, all we know about this crater is what we see on the surface. To find more information about this collision and get some proof, we'll have to drill into the ground. An asteroid this big is definitely not a joke. It could have caused a massive ice age and maybe even wiped out around 85% of species, even more than the asteroid that ended dinosaurs. In 4.5 billion years, which is how long our planet has existed, it's been punched by hundreds of big asteroids. But that doesn't mean every space rock that enters our atmosphere really makes it all the way to the ground. Most of those that manage to pass the atmosphere are relatively small, for instance, 3 feet across. That's good for us because any space rock that's less than 82 feet in diameter most likely won't make it past our planet's atmosphere. Since these space rocks come towards us very fast, they heat up the gases in the atmosphere, which burns them away. By the way, once cosmic intruders enter our atmosphere, they turn into meteors. And in most cases, they don't cause much damage, if any, as they fall down. But we used to have way larger things flying around and crashing into Earth. At least 190 of them have left scars you can still see today. One of the really big ones is in South Africa. It's 99 miles wide. It's actually the largest. At least that's what scientists think at the moment because they still need to check as many details as possible about this new crater in Australia. This one in South Africa formed about 2 billion years ago, and an asteroid that created it was probably larger than the one that had wiped dinosaurs away. And when an asteroid is bigger than 0.6 miles, it can have really big effects across the world. This impact was so strong that it could have caused fires everywhere and thrown lots of dust into the air. And when you have so much dust in the atmosphere, the climate on the planet can change for months or even years. Then we also have the most popular asteroid that made a giant hole we today call the Chicxulub crater. You know the story. It crashed into our planet 66 million years ago when dinosaurs were wandering around, catching food, falling in love, basically just doing their thing. The crash itself didn't erase them right away. It threw a lot of debris into space, and when it fell back to Earth, fires and flames were everywhere. The hit also produced a big cloud of dust that covered the planet for years. This cloud blocked the sunlight, which harmed plants and entire food chains. Even those dinosaurs that survived the crash and such difficult conditions had a hard time finding food, so they didn't make it. At least they left us many fossils and turned into the inspiration for movies and stories. A long time ago in Canada, something big crashed into our planet and left a big hole we today know as the Sudbury Basin. People used to think it was an asteroid, but now some experts think it might have been a giant comet made up of a mix of ice and rocks. The hole is almost gone now because of weather conditions though. But people still get to mine iron and nickel there, and at the same time find the leftovers of whatever space object fell there. If you move deep in southern India, you'll find a big hole called Lonar crater. Locals stumbled upon it 200 years ago and believed it might be from a volcano. But now we know it's a trace from a meteor that crashed into the ground about 35 to 50,000 years ago. What's so special about this crater is that it's the only one known to have formed in a type of rock called basalt. Around the crater, there are hills covered in trees, and animals like peafowls and gazelles live there. Birds also like to visit the lake near the crater during the winter. And the lake itself is quite interesting too. It can turn pink because of all those tiny organisms that live there. But this color change doesn't last long. I guess it's no surprise that it's not that easy to just hop on a plane and literally fly to the South Pole, aka Antarctica. Sure, there are airports down there, but they're not really set up for commercial flights. So most people go to Punta Arenas International Airport in southern Patagonia, Chile, and then take a boat if they want to see some penguins. But not only is it hard to fly there, it's even harder to fly over there. When you're cruising at 30,000 feet, you probably don't think much about what's happening below. But it's pretty unusual for flights to go directly over the South Pole, and planes flying across Antarctica are quite rare too. Technically, it is possible. I've already mentioned that there are airports there. But even so, the infrastructure down there is still super limited. There simply aren't enough airports or refueling stations to support regular commercial flights, making it tricky to operate in such a remote area. Plus, there are only a handful of specialized cargo and transport flights that go in and out, and they exist to cater to those few folks who actually live in Antarctica. Then there's the weather that drives up the costs. The simplest example is that the pilots there need special training, which costs money, which is all because of the weather. Another hurdle is something called ETOPS. These rules dictate how far twin-engine planes can fly from an airport. Since there are so few airports in Antarctica, it's tough for pilots to stick to these regulations. Historically, ETOPS made it next to impossible to fly close to or over the South Pole, while flights over land have plenty of airports to choose from. Antarctica is a whole different ballgame. These days, some aircraft can fly up to 330 minutes or, in rare cases, even 370 minutes from an airport. But even with those extended limits, certain parts of the airspace above Antarctica are still off-limits. Still, in the grand scheme of things, that might not be a huge deal. The most curious of you must have Googled that already and found out that there really are Antarctic airways. Please do not judge fast, and don't say I wasn't right saying how hard it was to fly to the South Pole. Let me break it down for you. Antarctic Airways advertise as the world's most exclusive transcontinental flight, but don't think you can just waltz in and book a ticket anytime. For starters, Antarctic Airways mostly operates flights to King George Island from December to March, so it's not all year round. But there are many more reasons why these flights are unique. If you dig into their website, you'll find you've got two choices: a full day in Antarctica or an overnight adventure. Prices kick off at $5,500 for a day trip and go up to $6,500 for an overnight stay. And if you're considering a private charter, get ready to shell out a pretty penny. It's rumored to start at around $125,000. Sure, that's a steep price compared to your average cruise ship crossing the Drake Passage, but here's the thing. It's about 20 times faster. A cruise ship takes 2 days from Chile, while Antarctic Airways gets you there in just 2 hours. Air travel to Antarctica is pretty limited, likely due to the high costs, limited seating, and the logistical challenges that come with flying to such a remote location. Plus, flights can often be delayed because of bad weather. Most travelers opt for a quick day trip or an overnight stay on King George Island, usually aboard smaller Beechcraft King Air 300 aircraft. The experience typically includes a stroll to a research station and a boat ride to see nearby penguin colonies, but that's just scratching the surface of what Antarctica has to offer. But once you're aboard Antarctic Airways, you'll see it's just like a regular flight on a smaller plane. You'll be served meals that have received some pretty good reviews. There are even photos floating around online showcasing the food, and honestly, it looks awesome. Those who've experienced it say it's luxurious yet unpretentious. You'll get a mix of meats and cheeses, plus treats like tiramisu, salmon salad, a single after-eight chocolate, and a selection of quality street candies. Today, everything may seem cool and safe, but back in the day, there were some pretty tragic events. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 tragically collided with Mount Erebus on Ross Island, Antarctica. Unfortunately, all 237 passengers and 20 crew members aboard lost their lives that day. Since 1977, Air New Zealand had been running regular sightseeing flights over Antarctica. This particular flight took off from Auckland Airport in the morning, with plans to spend several hours exploring the stunning Antarctic landscape before heading back to Auckland via Christchurch that evening. Initially, the inquiry into the incident pointed the finger at pilot error. However, growing public concern led to the establishment of a Royal Commission of Inquiry for a deeper investigation. The commission found that the crash had been primarily due to a change in the flight path coordinates made the night before, which the flight crew hadn't been informed about. As a result, instead of being guided by the computer down McMurdo Sound, as they were led to believe, the aircraft was mistakenly redirected toward Mount Erebus. In a way, this flight looks like modern one-day Antarctic tours. Flight 901 was marketed as a unique sightseeing adventure, complete with a knowledgeable Antarctic guide who highlighted various scenic spots and landmarks through the plane's public address system, while passengers enjoyed a low-altitude tour of McMurdo Sound. These flights operated as day trips, taking off from New Zealand and returning on the same day. The plane departed from Auckland International Airport at 8 a.m., aiming to land in Antarctica, with a scheduled return to Christchurch International Airport by 7 p.m. The total journey covered about 5,360 miles, including a 45-minute stop in Christchurch for refueling and crew changes before completing the final 464 miles back to Auckland, arriving at 9 p.m. Back in November 1979, tickets for these flights were priced at $359 per person, which is over $2,150 in today's money. Anyway, this tragedy isn't the reason why planes don't fly over the South Pole. The real culprits are weather, ETOPS regulations, and of course, penguins. Yep, those cool, friendly little creatures. Friendly, at least according to researchers. With no natural predators on land, all of them are in the water. They're not really afraid of people and actually seem to enjoy our company. The South Pole is completely uninhabited and packed with penguins, making it pretty tricky to build anything down there. By the way, the North Pole actually allows planes to fly over it. Not too long ago, there were direct flights from Copenhagen to both LA and Tokyo, operated by SAS, and they cruised right over the North Pole. Other airlines joined in too. For example, Emirates ran a flight from Dubai to LA that took the same route. The difference in air traffic between the two poles mainly comes down to where people live and how much land there is. Roughly 88 to 90% of the world's population hangs out in the Northern Hemisphere, while only about 10 to 12% call the Southern Hemisphere home. Most folks in the South are clustered around the equator in places like Indonesia, Central Africa, and Brazil. When it comes to flights heading to the South Pole, options are pretty limited. You mainly have routes connecting New Zealand and Australia, parts of southern South America, and a few spots in southern Africa, especially South Africa. There aren't really any direct flights over the South Pole, though some flights can get close to Antarctica. One possible route could connect Auckland, New Zealand to Cape Town, South Africa, but there aren't any scheduled flights for that right now. The few flights that came close to Antarctica are operated by Qantas and LATAM Airlines, linking Australia with Buenos Aires and Santiago de Chile. In 2021, Qantas took a long detour over parts of Antarctica on a flight from Buenos Aires to Darwin, and in July 2023, they adjusted a route closer to the continent to dodge some fierce headwinds on a trip from Santiago to Sydney.
So it turns out that you can't drive between South America and North America. And there's a simple reason for that. There are no roads connecting the two continents, not even a rudimentary one. Technically, you could try your luck crossing on foot, but let me tell you, that would be a huge mistake. The region that connects the two continents is called the Darien Gap. It stretches across southern Panama's Darien province and the northern part of Colombia. The only land route there is a 60-mile jungle trek. Crossing it can take anywhere from 3 to 10 days. It depends on weather conditions, how much you're carrying, and honestly, just pure luck. Chance plays a big role here, because this isn't some chill, relaxing nature walk. It's a harsh, extreme environment, known for being completely isolated and one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Still, people seem to forget that and go there anyway. Every year, the number of people crossing just keeps growing. In 2014, fewer than 10,000 people crossed the gap. In 2023, that number increased to 520,000. Now, you might be wondering, what are so many people doing in the middle of the two American continents, risking all that danger? Well, that's because the Darien Gap has become a route for refugees migrating to North America. But to get there, they face all kinds of dangers, from insect bites and infections to serious fractures. We're talking about a no-man's land. Since there are no police stations, immigrants must also watch out for thieves. Along the way, they have no choice but to rely on and support each other. Most people start the crossing with at least a tent or tarp, rain boots, water, and some food. But these things get heavy fast, and people normally can't carry enough supplies for the entire journey. At some point, people start drinking river water to avoid dehydration. But the water's full of bacteria and dirt, so it causes intestinal issues. And if things get serious, there's no medical help there. To make this whole scenario even worse, the temperatures are brutal, often hitting over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, a small subset of people who venture through the Darien Gap are hardcore adventurers and travelers looking for a survival experience in the jungle. But this region is no place for a relaxing vacation. A group of tourists who went there in 2023 ended up getting jungle rot, a fungus that affects the feet. The situation got so bad that a woman had to be carried out by the group on the last day because she couldn't walk. No matter how prepared people are for the Darien Gap, in the end, survival mostly comes down to luck. Out there, travelers won't find cities with solid infrastructure where they can crash at a hotel and gear up for the next day. In some spots, they might stumble across basic camps right in the jungle. These camps might offer wooden platforms for tents, bucket showers, toilets, and even plates of chicken and rice. But it all comes at a price. Wi-Fi, for example, might cost $2 an hour, and that seems like a pretty good deal, considering there's no cell phone service on the trail. They pretty much lose all contact with the outside world. Now picture a dense rainforest with steep, muddy terrain. The hiking trail is littered with boulders and tangled with vines, like nature's own tripwires. It climbs sharply over a mountain, becoming a serious challenge even for someone in good physical shape. The area also gets constant heavy rainfall, which can lead to landslides, flash flooding, and extremely muddy conditions. The situation gets so intense that even the t-shirts and faces of those who make the crossing end up covered in mud. They'll also have to cross a lot of fast-moving rivers. A Venezuelan dad who recently went through the area with his 2 kids said their sneakers ripped apart on the very first day. That's how powerful the rivers can be. And they're deep, too. Sometimes the water reaches all the way up to their shoulders. But the dangers in that area aren't recent. For centuries, the Darien Gap was thought to be impossible to cross. The first Europeans who ventured into Latin America saw it as kind of a jungle training school. They totally knew about its dangers, but still, many adventurers tried to make the crossing in the years that followed. In 1854, for example, an expedition disappeared for 49 days in the jungle, battling starvation and exhaustion. Then again, in 1870, a group of 100 men set out to cross it. Even though they were well prepared and carried cutting-edge equipment for the time, they still suffered tremendously during the journey. They had to rely on incredible resilience to survive the challenge. Over the years, people who ventured in often ended up passing away from hunger, thirst, and even drowning in rivers. They also faced the risk of being attacked by dangerous animals like jaguars, white-lipped pecaries, and the fer de lance, a fast, irritable snake that is one of the most venomous out there. The area is also swarming with mosquitoes, which can spread serious health problems. Leaning against trees to rest can also be risky. This jungle is full of spiked chunga palm trees, which are covered in long black spines up to 8 inches long. Unfortunately for us, these spines are covered in all sorts of bacteria. Just brush against a chunga, and you could end up with infected wounds. And yet another danger is getting lost in the dense forest and never finding your way back to safety. These days, though, this risk is a lot lower. Some people have mentioned color-coded markers that help guide travelers and keep them from going the wrong way. If they see blue or green fabric tied to trees, it means keep walking. But if they spot red fabric, that's a sign they're going the wrong way and need to turn around quickly. Since there are so many dangers, why not just build a road through the Darien Gap? While it might seem like a good idea, building a road connecting Panama and Colombia isn't really that simple. The Darien Gap has a humid climate, tough terrain, and constant rainfall, which means any attempt to build a functional road would be highly challenging and super expensive. Even though there have been previous attempts to fill in the gap. See, there's a huge road system called the Pan-American Highway, which stretches all the way from Alaska to the southern tip of Argentina. Nowadays, this highway hits a roadblock right at the Darien Gap. But it wasn't supposed to be like this, as the original idea was for the road to go through there. Leaders from Latin American countries tried to make this plan happen in the 70s, and then again in the 90s. But a lot of people were against it, mainly because they wanted to protect the local communities and the rainforest. Since the Darien Gap is mostly untouched by humans, it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It's believed that 1 in 5 species are endemic to the region, meaning they only exist in that specific area, like the Darien pocket gopher and the slatty slender mouse opossum. A road would have really damaged the ecosystem in the area, so the plans were scrapped. Eventually, an alternative was created to travel by sea. At least 2 companies started a ferry service connecting the 2 countries. However, the business wasn't profitable, and they ended up shutting down. Not long ago, Panama decided to close the Darien Gap route. Now they're sealed off with barbed wire fencing. It might just be a matter of time before other routes are created. But if you are an adventurer looking to visit South America, it's probably not best to wait for that. Traveling by plane to Colombia will always be a much safer option. Experts explain Africa is splitting in two, and it will look like this. Up close, the process is even more shocking, with a massive crack stretching from Mozambique in the south to the Red Sea in the north. This gap keeps growing every year, tearing apart the land and destroying homes. Now, specialists believe the continent could split much sooner than we expect. Africa is breaking apart because of the Somali Plate movement. Think of it like a dramatic breakup happening with tectonic plates. On the east side, there's the Somali Plate. On the west, we have the Nubian Plate. And during this breakup, the Somali Plate just wants more space, so it's pulling away from the Nubian Plate. This movement is forming the East African Rift, a region where tectonic plates are splitting apart, magma keeps rising from deep below, and a bunch of active volcanoes are being born. So this place is hot, with daytime temperatures that can soar to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night they cool down to 95 degrees. Inside this hot zone, we have the Afar Triangle, also known as the Afar Depression, and its geology is fascinating, as the rifting process is causing valleys, faults, and deep cracks to form in this region. Take, for example, this massive 35-mile-long fissure in Ethiopia's desert. It's also so wide that a person can easily fit inside of it. But what's scary is this crack keeps getting bigger, growing about a half an inch every year. The Nubian and Somali plates moving apart could also lead to a new ocean forming in Africa. This type of process isn't something new. About 150 million years ago, when dinosaurs were still around, a similar tectonic shift created the Atlantic Ocean. The continents were once all clustered together, but when a rift formed in what was Pangaea, it started pulling them apart, splitting the east and west hemispheres. So, a similar thing is happening with this gap in Africa. At some point, experts say the waters of the Indian Ocean might flood the East African Rift Valley, eventually creating a sixth ocean. Now, it's a pity you won't be able to swim in its waters during your lifetime, though. According to geophysicist Ken McDonald, who specializes in tectonic faults, this dramatic rupture could happen in 1 to 5 million years. Trust me, that's considered fast in geologic terms, and way sooner than most experts thought. Now, even though you won't get to watch Africa breaking apart, people there will still see and feel the signs. They might experience intense volcanic eruptions and strong earthquakes as this process slowly unfolds. One example is related to that scary crack in Ethiopia's desert we mentioned earlier. The fissure was created in 2005, after the area was hit by 2 volcanic eruptions and 163 earthquakes, each with a magnitude greater than 3.9. A crack this deep and long on Earth usually takes centuries to form, but in this case, it unfolded in just a matter of days. That's how powerful this event is. In fact, this kind of intense seismic activity can speed up the African splitting process, and that's why it's so hard to predict the exact time frame for the event. What we know is that people are already calling this new land the Nubian continent. If the predictions are right, it will include Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and part of Ethiopia. That's exciting and concerning at the same time. As new coastlines emerge, countries will need to make major adjustments when it comes to infrastructure and land management. They might lose a lot of roads, houses, and other constructions currently located near or right in the East African Rift. In Kenya, for example, the fissures tore apart a busy road, and authorities desperately tried to fill the gap with rocks and cement. In another case, an old woman was sitting and eating with her family when her house suddenly split down the middle. Recently, earthquakes that happened near Ethiopia's Afar region demolished 37 schools and forced about 5,000 students to leave their classrooms. Unfortunately, stories like this could become more common over the next few years. But there is a positive side to all this. Countries located in the middle of Africa, like Zambia and Uganda, could gain coastlines, and that might be great for them. Having a coast means they would get access to new trade routes, opening fresh economic opportunities. Plus, think about the tourism boom. With all those newly formed paradisical beaches, these countries could become the next big gateway spot for travelers. The local ecosystem in this newly created ocean will change as well, and new marine species may emerge. So let's look. This is the path where the rift is most advanced right now. I mean, we expect this is where Africa will eventually get separated. But things could get a little more complicated. Some time ago, Michael Daly, a geologist at the University of Oxford, suggested that this rift could extend further west. And some new evidence backs up his theory, pointing out that the crack could extend south through Botswana's heartland into South Africa, and west through Namibia, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. If these fractures widened into deep cracks, the ocean might come in and fill the gaps. Experts say Africa could split so much that it becomes an archipelago. But then again, we won't see that happening. It will take tens of millions of years for this to play out. We already know that Africa is at risk of breaking into a bunch of huge islands or small continents. The news isn't great for Madagascar either, as the world's fourth largest island could end up being split in half. But can the opposite process happen? I mean, can new land appear as the Nubian and Somali plates move apart? Well, as these tectonic plates get away from each other, the magma from the Earth's mantle might rise to the surface, and when it cools, it solidifies into new land. That's how other places in the world emerged, like Iceland and the Azores. So, yeah, the same process could happen in the East African Rift, and over the long term, it is possible that the rift could create new islands. For now, all we can say is that the geology of the Afar Depression is unique. It is the most active rift system on our planet. And when I say rift system, I mean a zone where tectonic plates are pulling apart. This region brings together all kinds of events, from faults in the Earth's crust to volcanic zones to the potential formation of a sixth ocean. For experts, it's like studying the evolution of rifts up close. And since it is such an active volcanic area, it also has enormous potential for tapping into geothermal energy, that is, using heat from inside the Earth to generate electricity. 2 geothermal power plants are already producing energy in Ethiopia, one in the Ethiopian Rift Valley and the other in the Afar. Now, geologists are exploring new potential spots. When we look at that deep crack in the ground, we know it's caused by tectonic plate movement. There's no mystery there. But what we still don't fully understand is why the cracks happen exactly where they do. For example, a crack that opened up in Botswana appeared after a magnitude 6.5 earthquake back in 2017. But the epicenter wasn't in the rift zone, where the plates are moving like we would expect. Instead, it was farther south. Since it's unusual for a rift to happen without volcanic activity, this fact really challenges our traditional ideas of how continents divide. Figuring out why these cracks appear in specific spots is still a missing piece of the puzzle for experts trying to explain how Africa is splitting. Hopefully, we get some answers before the continent turns into a massive archipelago.
This area might just be the most important spot in America right now, as it is worth over $1 trillion. There's something incredibly valuable hidden right here at Thacker Pass, and it is going to shake things up, not just in Nevada, but in the U.S. economy and its global relations. The McDermott Caldera is a massive area, about 28 miles long by 22 miles wide, stretching across northern Nevada and southern Oregon. It's in Humboldt County, a quiet, rural place with just one main city that's going to change a lot in the next 5 to 10 years. That's because they found white gold there. We're talking about lithium. And to explain why this metal is so important, We need a scale. On one side, we place a chunk of lithium, and on the other, an apple. What do you think will happen? If both have the same volume, the scale is going to tip toward the apple. That's because lithium is super light. Its density is about 0.3 ounces per cubic inch, which makes it the lightest solid you can find at room temperature. Lithium is also extremely reactive. That means it combines with other elements very easily, and it can catch fire just as easily. Mix it with water, fire. Expose it to air, yep, fire again. But when you combine its lightness with its high reactivity, you get a material that's perfect for batteries. Like the one powering your smartphone, laptop, or even your electric car. Nevada's been hiding this treasure for about 16 million years. The McDermott caldera used to be a volcanic hotspot, spewing molten rock and creating a huge lake filled with mineral-rich waters. Over time, that lake dried up, leaving behind thick layers of clay loaded with lithium. Right now, Thacker Pass Mine is sitting on one of the biggest untapped lithium reserves in the world, worth about $1.5 trillion. If everything goes as planned, they expect it to produce about 40,000 tons of high-quality lithium a year. And that's enough to make batteries for up to 800,000 electric cars. Like I mentioned earlier, this metal is the backbone of modern batteries. And with the world racing toward green energy, the demand for lithium is skyrocketing. Since 2020, its price has gone up more than 10 times, making it the most expensive battery metal in the world. That means it's way more expensive than magnesium, nickel, cobalt, and other materials used in rechargeable batteries. Right now, we're using about 1.16 million tons of lithium per year, and roughly 85% of it goes into making batteries, mostly for cars. Between 2030 and 2040, experts think we will need to double the money we're putting into production, from $94 billion to $188 billion. At the same time, investment in batteries will jump by over 200%, reaching $686 billion. Finally, by 2050, the demand for lithium is expected to be more than 10 times higher than what we're producing now. Sorry, I know that's a lot of numbers, but I just want to show how important Thacker Pass will be for the whole world. This mine is going to be key to keeping everything running. I mean, literally, since most of the future demand will be for things like cars, electric bikes, scooters, and renewable energy storage. Nevada could also be the epicenter of a global energy revolution, with the US aiming to cut pollution by 50% by 2030. A big part of that is replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric ones. And to make that happen, America is going to need a whole lot more lithium than it's producing right now. Nowadays, most of the metal used in the United States come from countries like Chile and Argentina. So if America wants to be a leader in this market, it really needs to invest more and more in projects like Thacker Pass. But there's another challenge. Finding lithium in a mine is one thing, but refining it is another story. Just like diamonds are carefully cut and shaped to bring out their sparkle and sold in rings and necklaces, something similar needs to be done with lithium. The raw material that comes from the mines has to be refined into a pure form that can actually be used in things like batteries. And China pretty much dominates this part of the market, and they're responsible for about 75% of global lithium-ion battery production. In other words, it doesn't matter if a country finds this powerful metal on its land. It will probably still need China to help refine it. So, the US is eager to strengthen its supply chain. In fact, they're so excited about this possibility that authorities have invested over $2 billion in loans into the Nevada project. Because of that, Thacker Pass could make the US a leader in lithium production worldwide. If their estimates are right, the McDermott caldera could hold nearly half of the world's known lithium reserves. It would almost double the reserves found in Bolivia's salt flats, for example, which used to hold the record for the world's largest deposit. This discovery is about to change Humboldt County for good. Those quiet streets surrounded by nature will never feel the same again. The mine will need about 2,000 workers, who will probably move there from other cities. Those workers will need houses, hospitals, schools for their kids, and all the necessary services. Do you see how it's like a ripple effect? For every person hired to work on the project during construction, 6 more people will get hired in the state to support them. Thacker Pass is also going to have a huge impact on the economy, not just in Nevada, but all across the country. People expect the mine to be active for 35 years, and each year it's expected to generate over $2 billion. But here's the thing. In Thacker Pass, they'll be extracting lithium from clay, and this process has never been done on such a huge scale before. So it's kind of a hit or miss. But if it works, it could completely change the industry. Big question. Who's interested in all this? Well, we've got 3 big companies eyeing the lithium market in the US. First, there's ExxonMobil. The oil giant wants to start producing lithium by 2027, and they have plans to become the top supplier for electric vehicles by 2030. Then there's General Motors, the company behind big car brands like Chevrolet and Cadillac. They're so interested in this business that they agreed to pay $625 million for a 38% stake in Thacker Pass. And finally, Tesla. In 2023, they started building a factory in Texas to process lithium. It's all part of their plan to handle more of their supply chain themselves. Now that you know how important lithium is, you might be wondering, what if we run out? Well, that could happen, since it comes from mining and, just like gold, is a finite resource. But that doesn't mean we'd have to give up smartphones or electric cars. If we ever run out of this metal, we'd probably find new ways to produce batteries. In fact, some experts think thermal batteries could be the next big thing. They store extra energy from renewable resources like wind or solar power, which are very cheap. So they represent a new way of storing energy at a small fraction of the cost. Nowadays, they're primarily used for powering the production of steel, cement, and chemicals. Thermal batteries are also being used to heat and cool large buildings. However, more and more projects are focusing on bringing this technology into private spaces, like houses and apartments. Experts are optimistic that initiatives like these could make thermal batteries as well known as electric batteries, and they might soon become a regular part of our daily lives. If nature had its own movie, it'd be a mix of Avatar and Interstellar. And I'm not even kidding. How else could you explain something as surreal as avalanches that spark blue light or pink lakes? The thing is, these aren't CGI, and I'll show you how Earth manages to pull these off. In October 2024, a guy was lucky enough to be at the right place during the right cold night and got to record a blue avalanche. I mean, it was mainly white, but it quickly flashed a blue light while it was running downhill. Now, scientists aren't totally sure how these blue flashing avalanches happen, but they have some ideas. One part of the mystery comes from a thing called triboluminescence, which is when light is created by rubbing or breaking something. It can happen on many different occasions. One of them is with ice structures. This happens because of friction, like when 2 things scrape against each other, causing a little bit of sparks to appear. It's a cold light, meaning it doesn't come from heat, just from pressure or movement. Sometimes when ice cracks or breaks under pressure, it can make a tiny electrical charge. When something disturbs ice blocks, making it crack, this ignites a reaction. The trapped ions are charged particles, and when they suddenly get released, they start moving around. This big release of energy is what creates flashes of light. In this case, a blue glow or flash of light. All of this happens absurdly fast, so to actually witness this release of light is super rare. In June of 2024, people in the US witnessed a massive emergence of cicadas that only appear once every 13 or 17 years. Cicadas spend most of their life cycles underground. While they're still nymphs, they can spend multiple years feeding on tree roots. Some species can spend up to 17 years under the earth before they're ready to re-emerge to the surface and officially turn into adults. But 2024, both 13-year and 17-year-old cicadas appeared at the same time. And since 13 and 17 are prime numbers, this event only happens once every 221 years. The forests got absurdly loud. You see, cicadas can sing anywhere as loud as 80 to 120 decibels. They usually sing in groups, which is why it tends to get pretty loud. Someone who actually lived through this event said they could yell at full strength while inside the forest and not hear themselves at all. When cicadas come out of the ground, the male insects produce loud songs by vibrating their abdomens to attract females. With millions of insects from both species singing together, you were in for a real-life natural symphony. Some people mistook these cicadas for locusts and called it an infestation. All the way down in Senegal, Africa, lies a unique lake. Arriving there, you might think you're walking out of a spaceship and into an unknown planet. After all, have you ever seen pink water before? The so-called Lake Retba, or Lac Rose, as known by the locals, has become internationally famous for shining its vivid pink color. And yes, you can swim there if you'd like, but you should know the water is extremely salty. Lake Retba is known to be one of the world's saltiest lakes, with a saline level of about 40%. And in case you're wondering why the water is pink, I assure you this has nothing to do with otherworldly factors. It's actually due to the high levels of salt. The algae, known as Dunaliella salina, is the one responsible for the pink shading. These algae produce red pigments that absorb sunlight, giving the lake its striking pink color. But if you'd like to catch the lake at its brightest color, you should go during the dry season, between the months of November and June. In other months, the rainwater dilutes the pigments and its color becomes less distinct. You can also find a bubblegum pink lake in Western Australia. It was actually crowned as the 10th most otherworldly sight in the world. Lake Hillier is shaped like a footprint and measures over 1,900 feet in length. You can really see how the pink stands out next to that deep blue ocean sitting next to it. Hey, look here. Any ideas what this is? Take your wildest guess. Okay, it looks like a river, right? But that doesn't look like water flowing on it. When locals first saw this happening, they didn't know what it was. So, to make things easier, they just called it Sand River. It sure was a good guess, but it turns out that what these people saw is more or less an optical illusion. It's not sand, but it's not exactly water either. You see, in arid environments, it's pretty rare for hails to happen. And in this case, what we're seeing are thousands and thousands of floating hailstones. Simply put, hail is just frozen rain that pours down in the form of small pebbles of ice. Looks pretty magical though, doesn't it? Now, isn't it crazy that something as beautiful as the Northern Lights emerges from a violent encounter? Yep, the so-called aurora borealis is actually the result of solar storms. Here's how it works. The sun, the giant ball of gas, sometimes throws out bits of plasma into space. When this plasma flies away from the sun, we call it a solar storm. These storms travel through space, passing by planets like Mercury and Venus before reaching Earth. When these intense solar storms hit the Earth's magnetic field, something amazing happens. These particles coming from the sun are captured by Earth's magnetic field. They collide with atoms and molecules in the Earth's atmosphere, and these collisions create auroras, especially near the north and south poles. From where we stand, these flashes look like colorful lights dancing in the sky. But that's not really what's happening. If you zoomed in, you'd see millions of tiny flashes happening super quickly. Oh, and the northern lights make sounds too. It's a mix of chirps, crackles, and buzzing noises, like a strange radio signal. And this is the sound of a solar storm crashing into our atmosphere. Does Thor ring any bells? I'm guessing he lives inside this next natural phenomenon. The thing is, sometimes when a volcano erupts, it can be accompanied by huge thunderbolts. Scientists often refer to it as volcanic lightning, and they're still debating as to why this happens. One of their guesses is that when a volcano erupts, it projects charged debris into the atmosphere. These charges then react with other charges already present in the air, which can result in a bolt of lightning. Cool, huh? The first time anyone ever witnessed something like this was during an eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. Last but not least, rainbows. Of course, which is the semicircular one we see most times. If you're lucky, you can witness a full circle rainbow, which usually happens in high altitudes, where the line of the horizon doesn't cut the rainbow in half. Yes, there's also the possibility of a lunar rainbow, aka the moonbow, which is a very unusual sight. It happens usually during full moons, when the light of the moon is at its brightest, and it's also perceived as a white arc, outlining the moon's outer rim. Let's just wow here for a moment. Frankenstein, unreasonably cold weather, and tons of lava. What do these things have in common? They all trace their origins back to Mount Tambora. This volcano in Indonesia had such a massive impact that the aftermath could be felt in Switzerland even a year later. And these spots are thousands of miles apart. Soon, we might be facing something similar again. Stick around, because I'm about to reveal the exact spot where the next eruption is expected to happen in 2025. Back in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted with unprecedented force, sending a colossal cloud of fine particles into the atmosphere. This cloud reflected sunlight, leading to global cooling and even the year without a summer in 1816. Temperatures plummeted, crops failed, and families worldwide faced food shortages, compounded by various health issues. Fun fact: Frankenstein appeared because of abnormally cold weather in the summer of 1816. The author got stuck indoors in Switzerland and wrote this story to pass the time. But that is the only positive aftermath. In England and Ireland, people struggled to find food. The crops were too bad that year, and this year without summer cost them lives, all because of the eruption in Indonesia. While many other volcanoes have erupted since then, none have had consequences as dramatic as Tambora. However, climate professor Marcus Stoffel from the University of Geneva believes potential serious eruptions aren't just a matter of luck, it's only a matter of time. So it's up to us. We can sit back and wait for the inevitable, or we can start preparing today. This future eruption will happen in a world that's vastly different from the one in 1815. Not only is our planet more densely populated now, but we've also experienced irreversible changes that affect our daily lives. Now, if you think volcanoes are always the bad guys, think again. They've actually played a crucial role in shaping our planet. They help with land formation, atmospheric development, and climate modulation. Just look at Yellowstone, for example. When thick lava oozed to the surface, it spread across the landscape and transformed the area forever. When volcanoes blow their tops, they release a mix of lava, ash, and gases, including carbon dioxide. But don't worry, compared to the emissions from fossil fuels, the amount from volcanoes is pretty tiny. What scientists are really keeping an eye on is sulfur dioxide, because it can have a big impact on our climate. When a major volcanic eruption happens, it can send sulfur dioxide soaring into the stratosphere, which is about 7 miles up in the atmosphere. Once there, it transforms into tiny aerosol particles that scatter sunlight, helping to cool the planet. This cooling effect isn't immediate though. Those particles can hang around for a couple of years and even circulate all around the globe. Nowadays, we've got special equipment to monitor sulfur dioxide emissions from space. Take Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. During its eruption in 1991, it released around 15 million tons of sulfur dioxide. Now, while that's a lot, it wasn't quite as massive as the eruption of Tambora. Still, Pinatubo managed to lower global temperatures by about 0.5 degrees Celsius for several years. Tambora, on the other hand, dropped average global temperatures by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. I know what you might be thinking. That's not much. but trust me, it makes a difference. If the planet warms up by just 1 degree Fahrenheit, it could really mess with sea levels. Experts think we might see a rise of up to 8 inches by the end of this century. This could wipe out a lot of farmland and coastal habitats, which would be a huge blow to many communities. So maybe a volcano eruption that can cool off the planet is like a natural mechanism helping us out? Not exactly. While it does cool the planet off, don't get tricked into thinking it's the kind of coolness our planet needs. Such temperature shifts can severely mess up with the crops, like they did in 1816. There's also evidence that major eruptions can disrupt rainfall patterns, leading to drier conditions in monsoon regions across Africa and Asia. You see, the summer monsoon relies on the temperature difference between land and ocean, which can be altered by volcanic activity. Interestingly, a warmer climate may enhance the cooling effects of volcanic eruptions. Experts explain that the formation and movement of aerosol particles depend on climate conditions. As global temperatures rise, faster air circulation can lead to smaller aerosol particles, which are more effective at scattering sunlight and thereby intensifying the cooling effect. Oceans also contribute to this dynamic. A warming ocean surface creates a stratified layer, hindering the mixing of warm and cold water, which could mean that volcanic eruptions primarily cool the upper ocean layer and the atmosphere above it, according to Stoffel. Moreover, climate change may influence volcanic systems directly. The melting of ice can trigger more eruptions by reducing the pressure that allows magma to ascend more easily. Additionally, increased rainfall associated with climate change can seep into the ground and interact with magma, potentially sparking eruptions. While the prospect of a cooling period due to a volcanic eruption might seem beneficial amid climate change, scientists warn that the effects could be dire. The immediate consequences could be severe, particularly for the estimated 800 million individuals residing near active volcanoes. A major eruption could devastate entire cities. For example, Campi Flegrei, located near Naples, Italy, is showing signs of increased activity and threatens the lives of about 1 million people. Now, if you're from Oregon, beware, as experts say this state might experience volcano eruptions. Are you scared? Don't be. It's actually not as scary as it seems. Let me explain why. There are more than 80 volcanoes in Oregon, but we're not interested in a single one of them because it's an underwater volcano that is likely to erupt in 2025. Axial Seamount is the most active volcano in the Pacific Northwest, yet it remains largely unknown to the public due to its location approximately 300 miles offshore and nearly a mile beneath the ocean surface. While its upcoming eruption is expected to pose no threat of a tsunami or significant land-based earthquakes because of its depth and distance from the Cascadia Fault, the data gathered from studying its eruptions can enhance our monitoring of potentially more hazardous volcanoes. Let's call it a friendly eruption, shall we? In reality, predicting eruptions is a complex endeavor. We often encounter alarming headlines, such as, "Yellowstone is about to erupt." Should we take these claims seriously? Not really. Yes, Yellowstone sits atop an active supervolcano that has experienced 3 major explosive eruptions in the past 2.1 million years. The last eruption occurred approximately 70,000 years ago, with the most significant explosion taking place around 631,000 years ago, forming the massive Yellowstone caldera. Naturally, many people are curious about whether Yellowstone will erupt again and when that might happen. Fortunately, scientists are employing new techniques to delve into these questions. A recent study suggests that Yellowstone is unlikely to experience another major eruption anytime soon. The reason is that the magma beneath the park is divided into a network of separate chambers. While there is a substantial amount of magma present, it's not sufficiently interconnected to support an eruption. Previous studies proposed that the existence of a massive layer of magma beneath Yellowstone, but these latest findings change that notion. To gain a clearer understanding of the subterranean dynamics, researchers utilized a technique called magnetotellurics, which employs Earth's natural electromagnetic fields rather than seismic waves. Since magma is a good conductor of electricity, this method is particularly effective for mapping molten rock and comprehending underground activity in volcanically active regions. By using magnetotellurics, scientists created a detailed map of the magma under Yellowstone, enabling them to make more informed predictions about future eruptions. But what will happen if an eruption similar to Mount Tambora occurs? By and large, there will be huge climate chaos. Yeah, the best scientists are looking for the solution should it really happen, but they don't have it yet. So technically, we're not ready for the second Mount Tambora. But for now, we're pretty much safe. No major eruptions are predicted. Whew!
Imagine you're driving across a bridge to visit a friend. The next day, you get in your car to go back, but there is no longer a river under the bridge you drove across yesterday. Believe it or not, this is exactly what happened to people in the south of Honduras when Category 5 Hurricane Mitch hit in October 1998. Choluteca Bridge, which the local authorities reconstructed earlier that year, was left in the dry, as the river now flowed around it, not under it. The structure soon became famous online as the Bridge to Nowhere. This waterway shifted its course overnight, but it normally happens over longer spans of time. A river will stop flowing straight when there is even the tiniest change in the landscape around it. Even something as tiny as a mouse can weaken a riverbank. Imagine a family of mice decides to start a home somewhere by the river and digs a cozy hole. Over time, water gets inside this hole and starts washing away any loose soil. Give it a couple of centuries, and the river will now have a bend in this place. And if you're worried about the mice family, don't be, because they moved out a long time before the water flooded their home. Things happen even faster for small streams because, well, their beds are also smaller. The current breaks down stones, the ground takes them in, and voila, a riverbed or bottom is formed. The current is the strongest in the middle of the waterway, and its power directly shapes the riverbed. The water flowing through rivers is full of soil and other particles. All this stuff goes from the spring into the mouth of a river and into Earth's oceans. In some cases, these particles build up at some point, and that's how new beaches, probably including your favorite, are born from fine-grained sand. On the other side of the river, the flow of water is much faster, so this fast-moving current literally slams against the next bank. Then the process of erosion starts all over again. River erosion is what happens when the flowing water takes away soil. And I have to tell you, things go super fast there. That water is so energetic, it can even carve into rocks, creating a canyon. If the riverbanks consist of loose material, such as humus, that's the soil you plant a flower in, then it is easier for the flowing water to erode it. Rivers in the plains are often wide and slow because there's little resistance from the ground around them. So you don't have to worry about waves tipping over your boat on a flatland river. In the mountains, streams quickly wash away all the surface soil and gravel, revealing the bedrock beneath them. It's tightly bound, so mountain streams are literally set in stone, as they cannot wash away this bedrock. So we have erosion to blame for waterways changing their course, and also mountains and hills. When a stream reaches a mountain or simply a rock, it has two choices: to flow around it or carve its way through it. In flatlands, rivers don't have any natural competition, so they choose a more winding path. All this twisting and turning increases the river's total length from the source to the mouth. One such example is the mighty Mississippi River in the U.S. It has a lot of curves and bends, which are called meanders. In the last century and a half alone, the Mississippi changed its course several times. The last major case was in 1876 when it left the historic city of Vicksburg in the dry. 2 years later, a team of American engineers came to the area to construct the Yazoo Diversion Canal, which took 25 years to complete. Thanks to it, ships could once again sail to Vicksburg, reviving the town's economy. What happened in this southern U.S. town in the 19th century is an ordinary natural consequence of river erosion. The bends in a waterway grow sharper over time, making the water flow faster. This speeds up erosion, and individual bends slowly start approaching each other to the point they merge. When this happens, the river straightens up overnight, leaving a lake in the form of a horseshoe in the place where the bend was. This newly formed body of water is called an oxbow lake. These still water lakes either dry up, since they're no longer fed by a spring, or they turn into swamps. In some cases, humans use them as water meadows used for agriculture. Lake Cicada in Arkansas is the largest oxbow lake in North America, formed by the Mississippi several centuries ago. The source of the Mississippi is a lake in Minnesota, but a river can also start when two other watercourses become one, or when the water simply bubbles up from under the ground. Even melting snow can feed a river, like the Amazon gets its water from the Andes. Determining the source of a waterway can be tricky, so the debate about whether Amazon or the Nile is longer is still ongoing. What scientists know for certain is that the Amazon carries more water than any other river. 1/5 of all the fresh water that enters Earth's oceans comes from this South American river. When you look at the Amazon River on a map, you'll notice how it flows from Peru to Brazil, that is, from the west to the east. This direction might seem odd when you compare it to the Mississippi, which flows to the south on the map. It's so confusing because you probably know rivers flow down, affected by gravity, but down doesn't automatically mean south. Running water will try to find the easiest route down, so there are no rules in terms of cardinal directions. The Nile River is the best example of this, as it actually flows north into the Mediterranean Sea. Northern Egypt, where all those pyramids are located, is on lower ground than Sudan, where the Nile is formed when the Blue Nile and the White Nile merge. Up in northern Asia and the Mackenzie River in Canada both flow northwest, while the Yellow River in East Asia flows in the same direction as Amazon, to the east into the Pacific Ocean. These major rivers are some of the best examples that a stream doesn't have to flow from the north to the south. Gravity is the only important factor that determines which way a stream will flow, as running water is all the time pulled downwards. The flow of water is faster on steeper slopes. When there's a sudden drop in the flow, waterfalls form. Angel Falls in Venezuela is the highest waterfall on the planet, with water dropping from a height of 2,600 feet. Watch your step. In a waterfall, the falling water can easily reach the speed of a Thompson's gazelle, but as a river approaches the end of its journey, it slows down significantly. The stream doesn't have enough energy to cut into the nearby land. All the sediment it has picked up along the way, such as sandstone, slows it down. At the place where a river meets the ocean or a lake, it gets rid of this sediment along its banks, creating a delta, an area rich in fertile soil. The Ganges in India has the biggest delta in the world, several hundred miles wide and visible from space. The Amazon, on the other side, doesn't have a true delta because the strong currents of the Atlantic Ocean wash away everything the torrent brings. The deepest section of the riverbed that runs along its middle is called a channel. This is where the current is the strongest, so ships travel on top of these channels. When engineers want to expand a waterway, they simply dig a deeper channel and voila, larger ships can now pass. This is just one way humans alter watercourses. We often strengthen the banks of a river to prevent erosion or build dams that stop or divert the flow of water. The oldest operational dam on the planet dates back to the time of Egyptian pharaohs. It was, of course, the first damn thing. In Mongolia, dinosaurs used to live, and now there are as many horses as there are people and 10 times as many sheep there. It's the emptiest country in the world. The capital has been moved 28 times, and they even have their own Olympics. So Mongolia is located right here, on the plateau of Central Asia, right north of China. It's the 19th country in the world by land area, but it only has a bit over 3 million people. It's like the population of Los Angeles, but having a whole country to themselves. If we don't count Greenland, Mongolia is the country with the lowest population density. It has only 2 people per half a square mile. The United States has 37. Well, that is if we only count people. Mongolia has a lot of livestock, about 67 million. It's 20 times more than the number of people there. Half of that livestock is sheep. Yet of all their animals, the most prestigious one is the horse. There's a traditional saying, a Mongol without a horse is like a bird without wings, and it explains a lot. A person with many horses is considered wealthy, but don't picture huge farms with big stables filled with horses. In Mongolia, having stables is more of an exception. Horses there roam free outside all year long. It costs next to nothing to sustain a horse there because they roam outside and even find food themselves, and the country's nature provides them with enough. Winter is tough because everything is covered in snow, but horses can separate grass from snow. They get frail by spring due to a lack of food, but recover very soon after winter is over. A family can have a sacred horse in their herd. It wears a blue scarf around its neck and is almost never ridden. People there do love their horses, and this tender relationship goes centuries back. There are many songs, stories, myths, and artwork featuring horses. In the Mongolian language, there are about 500 words to describe the traits of horses, and over 200 words to describe the coat color and pattern alone. Horses have a spiritual meaning too. It's believed that they have spirits that can help the owner, and they are also believed to be a transport to heaven, so they were often sacrificed after their owner's passing. Apart from domestic animals, the country is home to some endangered species. Plus, back in the day, dinosaurs roamed the land. The first ever discovered dinosaur egg was found right there. Today, dinosaurs are, of course, extinct, except in the movies. But there are snow leopards in Mongolia, and those are also rare. If you ever do go to this country, you must be careful. Snow leopards are so quiet, you won't hear them approaching you. They make no sound as they walk. But let's get back to geography. The climate in Mongolia can be harsh and unpredictable. Within just one day, the temperature can change by 35 degrees Fahrenheit. The country doesn't have any access to large bodies of water. That's why it's very dry and doesn't get much rain. In the south of Mongolia, there is a part of one of the coldest deserts on Earth, the Gobi Desert. Only 5% of the desert is covered in sand. The rest is bare rock. It has rivers, small lakes, and grasslands, but also gold, coal, and copper. So it's not a very typical desert, but still a desert. Rain clouds don't reach there because of the Himalayan range that keeps the area in the shadow. The desert is expanding every year, because of climate change, of course, but also because of deforestation and changes in land use. The whole country is quite dry with little precipitation, and that's why the inhabitants aren't afraid of the desert. Yes, the desert is populated. There are people living there. They're nomads who are busy with raising cattle. Nomads are people who don't have a settled home. They travel with their animals from place to place following the seasons. When they settle somewhere before their next trip, they set up a tent that is called a yurt. These have been homes in Mongolia for thousands of years, and it's amazing that some people still live in them. The skeleton of a yurt is made of poles, which are then covered with layers of felt and waterproof fabric. The Mongols are a very welcoming nation overall, but the nomads are on a whole other level. They don't get guests often, and they're always ready to greet someone and give them a taste of traditional horse milk. They don't even have bells at the entrance of their yurts, inviting guests to walk right in. Of course, there are also people who live in cities and villages and have settled homes, and they are the majority, about 3/4 of the population. The biggest city in the country is the capital, Ulaanbaatar. Almost half of the country's population is concentrated there in just one city, even though it's the coldest capital city in the world. The average yearly temperature there is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The average temperature in Washington, D.C. is 60 degrees, and it's 44 in Ottawa. When the city was first founded in the 17th century, it was located about 180 miles southwest of the current place. Then it was moved a little bit 28 times until it finally settled in the current location. Why? Well, back then, most of the population were nomads, so the capital city was a mobile settlement too. Depending on seasons, pastures, water supplies, and many other factors, it moved along with its inhabitants. Now the city is big and settled, so maybe it won't be moved again. But who knows? I know, I have yet to tell you about the Mongolian Olympic Games. The event is called Nadam Festival. It's an annual festival held in the middle of summer that most Mongolians watch. In one form or another, the festival has existed for centuries. Locally, the festival is called the Three Games of Men, and people compete in three skills that have traditionally been considered three manly skills. So, what are those three games? It's Mongolian wrestling, horse racing, and archery. Originally, it was just men competing, but recently women have started participating in archery and horse racing. Mongolian wrestling is a folk wrestling style that's been around for thousands of years. The depictions of it can be seen on many ancient plates found in the area. Today, it's the most popular sport in the country, and Mongolia hosts many international tournaments too. So, of course, there is a wrestling part at the festival, and it's the first game. The rules are quite simple. Whoever touches the ground with anything other than a foot loses. There are no weight classes, no age or time limits, so it takes as long as it needs to win. And yet, they do it with grace. Match courtesy is important. For example, if an opponent's clothes get tangled, the other one is supposed to stop and help solve the issue, even if it means missing a good opportunity to win. At the end of the match, when one participant is defeated, the winner will give them a hand and help them back up on their feet. The game starts with either 512 or 1,024 participants who wrestle in pairs. Every loser is eliminated. The game goes on for 9 or 10 rounds, depending on the initial number of participants, until there is a winner. Then there's horse racing. This is a cross-country long-distance event, between 10 to 17 miles, depending on the age of the horse. Up to 1,000 horses from all over Mongolia can participate in the competition. Then, in archery, people compete in teams of 10. Each archer wears traditional clothes and has 4 arrows to shoot into a wall of woven or wooden cylinders. Knock one out of the wall and you get points, and the team that gets the most points wins.
If you've ever wondered what it feels like to walk on diamonds, head straight to the town of Nördlingen in Germany. It seems like a typical fairy tale village with cute houses and red roofs, but its walls and streets are actually studded with over 72,000 diamonds. You'll need a microscope to see them, but they're definitely there. When the first people came to live here, somewhere around the 9th century CE, they were positive they were settling down in a volcanic crater. They didn't know the stone they were using for construction was embedded with millions of tiny diamonds, and the origins of the crater were out of this world. An asteroid slightly larger than half a mile in diameter hit our planet around 14.5 million years ago in what is now Bavaria and left a crater 16 miles wide. The bedrock was under such intense heat and pressure that the bubbles of carbon inside transformed into tiny diamonds at a concentration like nowhere else in the world. The locals didn't pay attention to their houses, built of what was left of that asteroid impact, shimmering on sunrise. Then, in the 1960s, 2 geologists arrived from the USA, studied the landscape from a distance, and noticed it didn't look exactly like a volcanic crater. After further research, they realized their theory that the crater was shaped from above and not from below proved right. They even had to change school books after the discovery, not to mislead the students. Once the word of the crater had spread, NASA got interested in it and sent their Apollo 14 and Apollo 16 astronauts to visit it to learn about what kind of rocks they'd find in space and which of them were worth bringing home. A moon rock that arrived with one of the missions is now on display at the local museum, and astronauts still visit the place. The locals, though, are so used to living among diamonds, they don't even find it special. The Australian town of Coober Pedy is known as the opal capital of the world and exists completely underground. The town even has the first 4-star underground hotel in the world. The reason people settled in this area was to work at an opal mine. Back in the day, the miners could hardly survive under the burning desert sun, so someone decided to put a tent directly into the mine. Then it turned into a home. Now, Coober Pedy has around 2,500 residents from different countries, about 30 shops, an opal gallery, museums, a bar, and other buildings, and is a popular tourist attraction. The town of Monowi, Nebraska in the USA has a mayor, a clerk, a treasurer, a librarian, a tavern keeper, and a bartender. Yet, the population is officially just one. Elsie Eiler has been doing all those jobs, paying taxes to herself and voting herself for mayor since 2004. Back in the 1930s, Monowi had a population of 150 people, grocery shops, and restaurants. When farming conditions got worse, people started leaving family by family until it went down to one person. If you feel like saving some money on house construction, look up some property in the Spanish town of Centenil de las Bodegas. 3,000 residents live under and into the sides of the Cadiz Mountains and use them as natural walls and ceilings. The first settlers moved in here back in prehistoric times. The rocks keep the houses cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Neft Dashleri in Azerbaijan was built as an oil platform in 1940, directly in the Caspian Sea. Once they discovered rich oil deposits, it started growing and is now made up of a network of platforms with around 5,000 people working and living here. The town has apartments, bridges, a library, a community center, and even a movie theater. The Japanese village of Nagoro has an unofficial second name, the Scarecrow Village. The last children were born here over 20 years ago. It officially has less than 50 residents, but it feels complete thanks to 350 life-size human dolls. When a local lady came back here in 2000 to look after her aging father, she saw the empty streets, shops, and schools. To change that, she and her friends started making cute dolls to replace the residents. The entire town of Whittier, Alaska, lives under one roof of a 14-story building of a former barracks. That's around 220 people who live here all year round, plus all the shops, a police station, a post office, a hospital, and a church. The locals are mostly working in commercial fishing, recreation, and tourism, or for the state ferry and railroad. The idea behind having everyone and everything in one place is to save money on heating in the always cold climate and let the people do all their business inside. This way, they don't have to face the unbearably strong winds. There's a town in Svalbard, Norway called Longyearbyen, where the sun sets on October 25th and doesn't rise again for the next 4 months. When it rises again in spring, the locals gather on the step of an old hospital at 12:15 to welcome the sun and celebrate its return. Then, it doesn't set for over 4 months. It happens because of the way the Earth is tilted on its axis. The sun only rises and sets once each year at the North and South Poles. Longyearbyen is the northernmost town in the world, so it gets affected by that. Its residents occasionally see polar bears and reindeer in the streets and get around on snowmobiles. The Italian village of Viganella was built right at the bottom of a deep valley and on the wrong side of the mountains. They cast huge shadows and deprived the village of the sun for the entire winter. The locals used to live like that for centuries, until one engineer decided to build a large mirror high on the opposite slope of the mountain. It's operated by a computer and reflects light on the central square of Viganella for at least 6 hours a day during the darkest months. Santa Cruz del Islote in Colombia is one of the world's most crowded islands, with around 600 residents in a 2.5-acre area. Fishermen built this island on a coral platform over a century ago. They chose it because of its beautiful location and the absence of mosquitoes. The families of the original settlers were growing, and most of them never left the island. You'll only find people with 6 different last names living here. When the family needs extra space, they just add an extra floor to one of around 100 homes in town. Now it has a school, shops, a church, and one restaurant. There is no traffic, since the streets aren't wide enough for cars or trucks, and the distances are perfectly walkable. No one on the island locks their doors, because everyone knows each other, and there hasn't been a single crime. Another place where people don't lock their doors is the Shani Shingnapur village in India. In fact, local homes and even shops don't have front doors, keys, and locks, but locals never feel unsafe. Residents believe their village is under the protection of Lord Shani, who will punish anyone who tries to steal something. A legend says that around 300 years ago, after heavy rain and flooding, the locals found a huge rock. The same night, Lord Shani appeared in the dreams of the village head and promised to protect the village if they kept the rock in the village unsheltered. The deity would live on the rock and oversee the village. Once the first bank opened in the village, they added a glass entrance and a barely visible electromagnetic lock with a remote control to respect the tradition. If you're looking for the most relaxed place in the world, check out the Villages in Florida. You can't move here unless there is at least one person over 55 in your home. And you'd have to leave behind any family members under 19. The most popular means of transportation in the villages is a golf cart. There are all sorts of free fun activities for the residents, so it's far from boring. It was April 10th, 1912. Richard had just departed from Southampton, England, aboard the most famous ship of the time, dubbed the Unsinkable. Since he had just witnessed a near collision with the SS City of New York, he decided to write to his wife and report the unfortunate and frightening event. "My dearest Sal," he wrote, "we got away yesterday after a lot of trouble." Little did he know that a mere 4 days later, both his pen and the ship he was on would be lost forever at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. Was this some sort of bad omen? Did Richard actually foresee what was about to happen to the ship he was on? In case you haven't figured it out by now, Mr. Richard Geddes was aboard the Titanic on the day that he wrote the letter to his wife. On April 14th, 1912, the ship seemed to have been lost forever. Along with it, so many secrets and treasures have settled at the bottom of the ocean. It took until 1985 for the Titanic's wreck to be finally rediscovered using state-of-the-art sonar technology. Ever since then, they've managed to recover thousands of items from the Titanic, and many of them went on display or auction. Things like jewelry, a life jacket, a menu from the ship's restaurant, or even a sample square of carpet from the first-class stateroom have all captivated the public's attention, just like the many stories of the people on board. Scientists have even tried to come up with strategies to get the Titanic back up altogether to properly study it and stop it from getting more and more damaged at the bottom of the ocean. Some have suggested filling the wreck with ping pong balls to make it float, while others even considered injecting it with 180,000 tons of Vaseline. Another idea was to use 450,000 tons of liquid nitrogen to trap it in an iceberg that would float to the surface. But they eventually had to let go of all these potential strategies, since the Titanic is way too fragile to ever be recovered. The Titanic may be one of the most interesting ships lying at the bottom of the ocean, at least in popular culture, but deep-sea divers have a lot of other stories to share. Planes also sometimes find their way to the bottom of the ocean. Deep-sea divers in Oahu, Hawaii, came across the wreckage of an F-4U Corsair plane. It seems to have crashed into the ocean in 1946, as it didn't have sufficient fuel. If you can dive deep enough, you might even stumble upon statues and lost artifacts, like those found in the world's only underwater archaeological park, off the coast of Naples, Italy. It features the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Baia. The underwater statues found here are breathtaking, to say the least. In an ironic twist of events, some of the equipment we intended to use to get us to the moon was lost at the bottom of the sea for a very long time. But how did that happen? Beginning from the late 1960s and ending in the early 70s, many Apollo rockets were launched to orbit the Earth and the Moon. When reaching altitudes of about 38 miles, the first portion of the spacecraft, including the engines, needed to separate. People thought these components got destroyed or lost forever. But were they really? In 2012, a team of specialists discovered a bunch of rocket engines 14,000 feet off the coast of Florida. They have since gone through a 2-year renovation plan and are now on display at Seattle's Museum of Flight. Can you imagine stumbling upon a whole city underwater? Back in 2001, a lost city was discovered in the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India. Some archaeologists believe it to be the oldest city in history. By comparison, it's almost the size of Manhattan and features massive walls and even plazas. They stumbled upon pieces of sculpture, artwork, and even what looked like ancient wooden furniture, believed to date back up to 9,500 years ago and 5,000 years older than any city previously discovered. Okay, how about an underwater river? I can't even imagine what that would look like, but some deep divers claim to have seen it south of Tulum, Mexico. Is that even possible? Well, not really, since the Cenote Angelita Cave is not a true river, but a very special type of optical illusion. It's formed by a halocline, meaning a cloud of hydrogen sulfide at the bottom of this underwater cave. Turns out you can actually swim right through this cloud, which makes you feel like you're swimming through a flowing body of water. Not all things discovered underwater are inanimate objects. Some of them are actually quite scary sea creatures. A jellyfish might not be on your list of things to look out for if you can avoid the stings. But this giant one, also known as a lion's mane jellyfish, is the largest known species of its kind. In all fairness, you'll only uncover it if you happen to dive into the waters of the Arctic, Northern Atlantic, and Northern Pacific Oceans. You surely won't miss it, since it stretches across 120 feet from the top to the bottom of its tentacles. When it comes to deep-sea diving, a lot of people are looking to discover some lost treasure. One diver was lucky enough to have hit the literal jackpot when he came upon nearly $1 million worth of treasure on the bottom of the seabed. That was back in 2015, when this lucky diver was swimming just off the coast of Florida. What did he find, you might ask? Well, about 51 gold coins, 40 feet of gold chain, and a rare single coin that was tailored for the King of Spain, Philip V. Speaking of people looking for lost treasures, divers also sometimes found pirate ships. They discovered one of these pirate shipwrecks in 2015 off the coast of Colombia. It dates back to the 18th century. The value of this forgotten ship was estimated to be between $4 billion and $17 billion, as it contained treasures, precious stones, gold, and countless other really valuable items. By comparison, a whole island in the Bahamas is up for grabs at $75 million. A computer is the last thing you'd ever expect to discover underwater, right? And this was no regular computer, but an ancient one. And yet, someone stumbled upon it between 1900 and 1901 on the spot of a shipwreck located off one Greek island. Researchers believe this weird stone contraption to be the earliest form of a computer. It was designed to serve many purposes, such as predicting astronomical positions and eclipses on the calendar. Since humanity lost most of the technology used back then, it was wonderful to rediscover it so many years later. It let us piece together many of the ancient Greeks' accomplishments. The computer is now at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, should you ever want to check it out in person. This has to be one of the most mysterious places on Earth. It's called the Mariana Trench, and it's the deepest part of the Earth's oceans. We really don't know how deep it is, since it's so difficult to measure, but it's somewhere around 7 miles deep and 5 times longer than the Grand Canyon. They first studied this massive underwater hole back in 1875 using a weighted rope. Back in 2012, a Canadian film director named James Cameron reached the bottom of the trench in the submersible vessel Deep Sea Challenger. Some of the most bizarre creatures on the planet call this place their home, including the Dumbo octopus, the sea cucumber, and the goblin shark. The Mariana Trench took its name after the nearby Mariana Islands, which are named Las Marianas in honor of the Spanish Queen Mariana of Austria.
Now, when you think of Norway, Things that come to mind are the sun that never sets in the summer, unbelievable nature, the fact that it's one of the happiest countries in the world, even white bears that freely roam in the wild. I'm guessing they're happy too. Already planning your trip to this dream country? Well, don't rush. You'll have to review your budget. Fuel there is 10 to 15% more expensive than in other Western European countries. A meal at a cafe for one person will cost at least $30. Plus, consider yourself lucky if you manage to find a hotel at $100 a night. If you Google the most expensive country in the world, you'll see this list. Switzerland, which is meanishly expensive. The United States, duh, been there, know that. Luxembourg is not a surprise either. And then, all of a sudden, you see Norway. Just so you know, a family of 4 would need over $4,000 a month just to exist in Norway. And it doesn't even include rent. Specialists say that Norway is around 7% more expensive than in the US. Norway is a bit weird though. Usually the richest countries have national currencies that are stronger than the US dollar. Take Swiss francs, for example, or the Kuwaiti dinar, which is literally the boss when it comes to currencies. Like one Kuwaiti dinar can snag you $3.25 US. Now, here's where the mismatch comes. The Norwegian krone is dubbed the weakest currency in the West. Well, how come? In the wild world of global currencies, the Norwegian krone used to be a tough player known for smart money moves. But surprisingly, it is now the weakest currency in the West, taking a big hit in the last decade. It has fallen hard against the US dollar and euro, causing concern for central banks and money folks worldwide. The oil price roller coaster is a major factor in the krone's struggle, as Norway relies heavily on oil exports. But even with oil prices relatively high, it remains historically weak against major currencies. The weak Norwegian krone is affecting everyday folks too, with prices rising on almost everything due to heavy imports. Inflation is growing, leading to interest rate hikes by the Norges Bank. High interest rates are hurting the housing market and making life more expensive for Norwegian citizens. So one of the supposed reasons for why Norway is so expensive might be weak national currency. What else is particular about Norway? Well, climate for sure. It may be hard to imagine a freezingly cold country plunging into riches. It's an imagery we usually see on social media with geotags Dubai, Saudi Arabia, or even Kuwait. And it makes sense to think now that all the riches are somewhere southward, as these places have strong oil-based economies and super strong currencies. But in reality, better economies in the south are a current trend. Ever wonder why cold countries seem to be raking in the cash while the hot nations are just hanging out? Turns out, those living in chilly climates had to hustle just to survive winter. Think building shelter, stockpiling food, and keeping that fire burning. Meanwhile, those basking in the sunshine had it a little easier with hunting and foraging year-round. This theory holds true even in the land down under. Sydney and Melbourne, the top dogs in Australia's wealth game, also happen to be some of the coldest cities, while Darwin, the warmest city, is lagging behind. Some might argue that this theory doesn't hold up when we look at ancient civilizations or modern hotspots like tropical Singapore. But hey, times change, and so does wealth generation. Back in the day, it was all about farming, but now it's more about industry and innovation. So, Norway may seem to have been bound to get rich historically and geographically. Still, it's not exactly so. Norway used to struggle a lot. Back in the day, it faced some tough times with harsh winters and tricky geography. They even had famines that pushed families to seek a better life in the US. So, how did Norway go from rags to riches? Yep, oil and gas played a big role. The country is small, but it has around 0.31% of all oil reserves in the world. But in Norway, there's more to the story than just black gold. For example, the top oil reserve is not some Arabic country, but Venezuela, which claims up to 20% of the world's liquid gold. Still, Venezuelan's economy is far from stable, so it's not all about oil. Although bested in forest size by other European nations, Norway was an unrivaled powerhouse in lumber during the Age of Sail. Thanks to its strategic fjord path, timber from its inland forests could quickly reach fjord-side mills and global markets. As railroads unlocked larger forest potential in other countries post the 19th century, Norway was Europe's timber king, bolstered by a world-class merchant fleet by the 20th century. The Norwegian timber wealth, coupled with early cooperative societal norms, spurred growth across several sectors, from agriculture to fishing and banking. Despite being labeled poor in the 19th century, Norway's GDP per capita outshone Eastern and Southern European nations. The nation's ascendancy continues beyond the discovery of its oil reserves. Norway is unique, with a small population but sprawling land. Despite its vastness, the Nordics are scattered and considered one of the most spacious countries globally. Much of the North's territory stretches beyond the Arctic Circle, offering harsh landscapes with thin topsoil covering the bedrock. The tough terrain in Norway, full of mountains and with a short growing season, limits arable land to only 2.2%, similar to Yemen. The scattered arable land in small valleys makes extensive farming impractical, a far cry from the efficient farming in the U.S. With a huge chunk of land and coastlines, but a small population, Norway makes some serious cash from its reserves. Plus, nature has been pretty kind to Norway, with rich fishing grounds, hydropower from rivers, and power from cold waters. And only then comes the little thing called oil. The late 50s saw a big discovery that changed everything for Norway's economy. Fast forward to today, and petroleum activities have been a major game changer for Norway, feeding its economic growth and funding its welfare state. But Norway didn't just sit back and watch the money flow in. They made smart moves, like creating a sovereign wealth fund to manage their oil wealth for the long haul. The fund sees some big bucks, currently standing at 1.7 billion Norwegian kroner, or over 160 million US dollars. Norway uses the interest from this fund to boost its annual budget, ensuring top-notch healthcare, education, and welfare for its citizens. And here's the kicker: Norway's not resting on its laurels. They're investing in sustainable technologies, like offshore wind power, to secure a bright future beyond oil and gas. Now, Norway may be expensive, but it can't compete with the world's costliest place to live, Monaco. It's almost 4 times more expensive than the global average. So, if you're looking to rub elbows with the rich and famous, look no further than Monaco. With property prices soaring to an average of over $50,000 per square meter in 2022, it's no wonder why this tiny country is a magnet for the la-di-da. However, there's a place that's particularly expensive for tourists, and I'm not talking about tourist traps. Neither Oslo nor Monaco can beat the prices in, well, take a second to make your guess. Ready? Welcome to Ashgabat, Turkmenistan's capital. A gallon of milk costs a whopping $15 US, while a standard internet subscription plan will set you back $168 US a month. Calm down, you're not poor, it's just an economic glitch. The reason for these prices is simple. The Turkmen national currency exchange rate in relation to dollars is fixed and never changes. $1 equals 3.5 manats, and it's been so since 2015. Local prices in the local currency grew to inflation, making it not proportionate to prices in dollars. The exchange rate never changes. So if you live there, such prices don't seem to be extraordinary. But if you come with dollars, you're in for a pricey trip.
From tiny islands to giant cities fanning out for dozens of miles, you're gonna learn about the most densely populated places on Earth. It'll make you question the limits of the impossible. To what lengths are people ready to go in their search of a better life, or simply trying to survive? The list of such places includes both Hong Kong and the Maldives, the Egyptian city of Tanta, and a tiny island in Lake Victoria in Africa. Let's find out more about how people manage to live there. Hong Kong has an official population of 7.5 million people, and this number is expected to reach 8.5 million by 2041. The density of the city's population is more than 18,000 people per square mile. Despite a rather low birth rate, the population of Hong Kong is on the rise. This paradox has an explanation. A lot of people immigrate to Hong Kong all the time because of all the opportunities this city offers, like various jobs. The city has an incredibly high price of land. It's one of the main reasons for its high-density development. People with low and even middle incomes can only afford to live in high-rise buildings, and Hong Kong has more than 9,000 of those. Plus, there are more than 300 buildings that are over 490 feet in height. It's more than New York, Shanghai, and Dubai can boast. Hong Kong's incredible growth as one of the tallest cities in the world has a lot to do with its incredible urban planning. At the same time, housing is unbelievably expensive in this region. Median home costs are 18 times the median annual income. That's the reason why less fortunate residents live in the so-called coffin houses, where apartments are tinier than a standard parking space in the USA. Take Quarry Bay, for example, a densely packed neighborhood in eastern Hong Kong, and its Monster Building. It's actually not one building, but a group of 5 connected constructions. There are more than 2,200 units in these 5 blocks, and rumor has it that it houses around 10,000 people. Despite such cramped living conditions most Hong Kong's inhabitants have to deal with, the city is home to several dozen billionaires. Look, this is half a football field. And that's what 1/3 of Bill Gates' home looks like. Another example for you. 2/5 of the White House. These are not random numbers. That's the territory of Migingo Island, located in Lake Victoria between Kenya and Uganda. Over 100 people live on this tiny piece of land. Don't you think that those metal-tiled roofs make the island look like a huge turtle floating on the water? Unfortunately, because of the island's small size, there's barely any vegetation there. Most of the surface of the island is covered with rocks, except for this tiny area. It's covered with grass and hosts not more than 5 shrubs. The island is all about fish and fishing. The landing point turns into a fish market every day at noon. The trade doesn't last long. It usually finishes at 2 p.m. when the boat leaves. The only thing the inhabitants of the island have is fish. So every morning, they get essential supplies for small businesses from Kenya. That's why you can buy everything you need in local stores, from food to fishing equipment. The inhabitants of the island not only catch fish but also gut them on the rocks and then fry and eat them in cafes. Yep, there are around 13 cafes and bars on the islands where people eat, play dice, and cook ugali, a typical dish made from maize flour. Back to giant cities and busy streets. Welcome to Shenzhen, the most densely populated city in China. This city hosts around 17.5 million people. With so many inhabitants, the city faces loads of challenges. For example, overcrowded schools and beaches. Speaking of the latter, some areas even implement a booking system to manage beach crowds. The most astonishing thing about this megapolis is that it's grown to its current size within a mere 40 years or so. It used to be a fishing village, but then, thanks to the support of the authorities and the city's close proximity to Hong Kong, it turned into a bustling financial and economic center. These days, it has the status of one of the busiest container ports in the world, along with Shanghai and Singapore. Shenzhen also has had the fastest growth in millionaires over the last 10 years, 140%. Such an increase is far greater than in the first-tier cities in China, including Beijing and Shanghai. Islet Abrui is a Caribbean island that forms part of Haiti, and it's one of the most densely populated islands in the world. Around 500 people living there share an area of a mere 0.4 hectares. You might think this is just another fishing village, but Islet Abrui is more like a factory. Once you set foot on this island, you'll instantly see a maze of alleyways. Follow them, walking past crooked thatch and tarp-covered huts, and you'll eventually find yourself in the center of town. The main landmarks are 2 concrete buildings, and one of them is a store. In the middle, you'll see a modest town square equipped with 2 solar streetlights. One is old and is no longer in use, and the other is shiny and new. On the island, men outnumber women and kids. Many people are out of town fishing during the day. The horizon surrounding the island is dotted with sails and pirogues. The rest remain on the island doing other jobs, like repairing boats, mending nets and traps, and preparing tons of fish for shipment to Haiti and other places. As for kids, they spend their days swimming. Our last destination is the Egyptian city of Tanta, which is also one of the most densely populated places in the world. It has about 70,000 people per square mile. Just for comparison, there are slightly under 30,000 people per square mile in New York. The city is located between Cairo and Alexandria. It has huge cotton plantations, and in 1856 it became a stop on the railway network, mostly for exporting the cotton growing in the area to Europe. And even though the area around Tanta was mostly fields, the settlement turned into a large, crowded city. In late October, the city becomes the center of celebration of the cotton harvest. 3 million people come from around the Delta and other parts of the Arab world for the colorful 8-day celebration. Tanta is famous for its sweet candy. It's made of gelatin, coconut, sesame, peanuts, and chickpeas. Loads of these sweets are sold during festivals when many Egyptians visit the city. No wonder they've been considered a delicacy since the 1800s. Tanta also has a lot of cotton processing factories, as well as textile industries. Plus, it's a university town. Tanta University was established in 1972. Male, the capital of the Maldives, has a population of more than 200,000 people. It means 49,000 people per square mile. 80% of the land sits around 4 feet above sea level, which means that if part of the islands go underwater, people will have to relocate. An artificial island that was created to manage waste is getting overburdened. In 1997, Hula Male, another artificial island, was built to alleviate dramatic population pressure. These days, it's already as developed as Male. The Maldives consists of more than 1,000 islands stretching along a 500-mile axis. All of them are coral islands. They grew around the rims of prehistoric undersea volcanoes. Only 188 islands are inhabited, but most of them have fewer than 1,000 residents. More and more Maldivians are giving up on island life and moving to the capital city. But Male is already pressed hard against the limits of human habitation. If even more people move there, its physical structure would need to be completely reworked. The authorities are already surrounding Male with sea bridges and artificial islands packed with houses. The world's largest fence spans over 3,100 miles from Queensland to South Australia. If stretched out, it could easily connect London to New York. And if you'd walk next to it, you'd need 6 months to complete the journey. It wasn't built to safeguard the Australian border. Why would it, since Aussies are just surrounded by water? It wasn't meant to protect some important building either. Its purpose is to keep some animal species away from each other. It was back in the late 1800s when Australians started building parts of this fence. They wanted to create a barrier separating the lively, bustling part of the country where cities like Melbourne and Sydney thrive from the harsh, dry outback. They used wooden posts dug deep into the ground, linked up with wire mesh standing about 6 feet tall. Some parts of the fence even have a second electrically charged layer. To make sure this fence did its job, they added some red and white lights to help guard things even at night. A team of over 20 people work full-time to keep things in check here. And every year, local authorities chip in around $750,000 to keep the construction in shape. Why all this trouble? The main reason was dingoes. These gingery, wolf-like creatures are Australia's largest carnivore mammals, and they're also apex predators. They were causing a lot of trouble to local farmers, especially in southern Queensland, where they often go after sheep. For the most part, the fence has been doing its job okay, but it's not foolproof. Some dingoes still manage to sneak through. Other times, wild camels end up crashing into it. That's because Australia has quite a massive camel population roaming around. But this man-made solution did more than locals expected. They thought there would just be fewer dingoes within the fence, but fewer dingoes mean more kangaroos. And more kangaroos mean more competition with the sheep for food. It's not just the bigger species feeling the squeeze. The smaller animals and the greenery also went through changes. With all this competition in a smaller space, locals noticed less diversity in the plant life and small animals. The soil became less nutritious over time, affecting plant growth. Plus, the fence acts as a roadblock for animal migration and seed dispersal. Even the sand dunes are feeling the effects, with less grass cover to hold things together. When scientists looked at kangaroos on both sides of the fence, they noticed that the young pups inside were lighter and tinier on average. The outsiders had bigger feet and heads for their age, and it wasn't because they were eating a different diet. The kangaroos that were stuck sharing the land with dingoes had to bulk up faster to survive. On the flip side, those inside the fence took it slower because they weren't under the same type of pressure. These had to compete with a lot of other creatures for food, so a bigger size wasn't a priority anymore. Researchers are still not sure if this difference is a quick fix or a long-term gene adaptation. What about domesticating dingoes? Wouldn't that help? Many think dingoes were once pets in Australia, but it's not known for sure. These days, they're pretty wild, just like wolves, hyenas, or coyotes. Most of them don't need packs to survive and are solitary hunters with sharp instincts built in. So taming them isn't going to be easy. Still, taking down the construction is not an option for now. Australians are so strict when it comes to making sure dingoes are kept away that they even put laws in place for people who mess up with the fence. Leaving a crossing gate open can put people behind bars for up to 3 months. Damaging the fence can cost people 6 months' worth of their freedom. It wasn't the first time Australians thought a fence could help with animal issues. Before they needed it for dingoes, they experienced a serious bunny invasion. Cute as they are, rabbits were damaging the land used for farming, so locals thought of a 3-part fence. The first one stretched all the way from Ravensthorpe in the south to Pardew Station on the Pilbara coast. It was over 1,100 miles long, making it the longest unbroken fence globally at the time. All these bunny problems could have been traced back to a man named Thomas Austin. Back in 1859, when he first came to the land down under, he thought it would be a good idea to release a few rabbits into the wild, thinking it would add a bit of charm to the place. But since rabbits aren't native to Australia, they didn't have any natural predators at the time. They're also pretty adaptive creatures, needing just some grass for feeding. They reproduce at astonishing speeds too. A mama rabbit can have 4 litters a year, with as many as 5 bunnies each. Pretty soon, their numbers boomed. By the late 1880s, the bunnies had caused so much damage that local authorities came up with a proposal. They'd offer the equivalent of almost $2 million today to anyone who could come up with a solution to this long-eared problem. Nobody claimed the prize, but a commission did gather a bit over a decade later and came up with the fence idea. Maintaining those fences was complicated. They had inspectors keeping an eye, with each one responsible for a stretch about 500 miles long. There were also these boundary riders patrolling smaller sections, using bikes at first, then switching to camels or using camels to haul buggies. They even tried using cars at one point, but they couldn't handle the rough terrain and constantly had punctured tires. In terms of its effectiveness, well, by 1902, rabbits were already hanging out on the wrong side of the fence. That's why, 4 years later, they put up another one. It worked for a while, so much so that the local authorities didn't bother helping out farmers past that second fence with rabbit netting loans. Those caught between the two fences, however, still had a rough time dealing with rabbit trouble. Soon enough, rabbits spread even over fence number 2, and it was clear the solution didn't work. In some areas, even while the fences were being built, those sneaky bunnies found their way past them. To this day, the rabbit population still sometimes puts the Australian officials through rough times. The dingo fence may be the longest one, but it's not the weirdest. The aquarium fence in Turkey might take that prize. This 164-foot aquarium fence was built to make sure the expensive villa's ocean view would be visible from every one of its levels. These days, it gathers a lot of tourists from all over the world, eager to see the variety of fish it contains, and even the octopuses. Putting up a see-through structure wasn't hard. The real challenge was connecting the aqua fence to the Aegean Sea through a buried pipeline stretching across 13,000 feet of land. This ensures water constantly flows, keeping the aquarium clean and the fish happy. To make sure no one damages the delicate fence or steals any of the fish or two, the owner also invested in security. He installed a network of 17 cameras equipped with facial recognition. Visitors are free to look and take pictures, but step too close and you're likely to trigger alarms. Another one of those weird fences is New Zealand's bra fence. If you ever find yourself through central Otago, you might stumble upon a fence adorned with bras of all kinds of shapes, sizes, and patterns. Its story takes us back to 1999, when people in the area found 4 bras mysteriously hanging on the fence near Cardrona Valley Road. Some were a bit surprised, but then others started adding their bras to the decor. Some more bras appeared, and it became a must-see spot for tourists. Its popularity was so high that at times it caused traffic problems in the area. Mexico is huge and one of the most populated countries in the world. Over 128 million people live there. But why did more than half of them decide to pack up in this tiny strip? This area in the center of the country makes up only 18% of Mexico, and the locals have been living there for centuries. All because it seems to be the only livable place in the country. To the north, there are hot, dry deserts. Let's face it, it may be pretty hard to survive in such climatic conditions. To the south, there are jungles, and those are nightmarish. Jungles are warm and wet, so they might trick you into thinking that they'll be a cozy home for you. But it's very hard to build anything in them. The concrete won't dry because of awful unstoppable rains, and the heat messes up asphalt roads. This is why there are only 8 paved roads through the southern jungles connecting Mexico to Central America. Roads are crucial for proper life. More roads mean better and cheaper transportation, which helps people trade, do business, and make more money. But jungles have even bigger problems than just a lack of roads. Farming. Most of the nutrients in the jungle are in the plants, old wood, and decaying leaves. When these things decay, they become McDonald's-level meals for insects, fungi, and bacteria. They immediately start recycling the nutrients so fast that almost none reach the soil. With no nutrients, the soil becomes barren and useless. Oh, and we still need to clear the jungles from time to time, otherwise they may become impossible to get through. People do that by using slash and burn methods. Because of this, they often end up with poor soil that needs lots of fertilizers to grow crops. And don't forget about the ever-present jungle pests. These guys pounce on the crops, and no amount of pesticides can get rid of them forever. To make matters even worse, nearly 70% of Mexico is located in the mountains. It's one of the most mountainous countries in the world, similar to Switzerland. And mountains, just like rain, do everything in their power to prevent humanity from thriving. Building infrastructure there is nearly impossible. It requires tons of money and labor compared to flatlands. And they also make transportation between these valleys and to the coast much more challenging. Now, imagine mountains combined with the jungles. Exactly. But hold on a minute. Isn't the central strip of Mexico filled with the highest mountains in the country? This area is packed with plateaus and valleys and sits at elevations of 7,000 feet or more. This is as high as a ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. Then why in the world does everyone still live here? Turns out, these are actually good mountains. Since they're so high, they block the hotness of the desert and the tropical zones. This way, they create cooler, drier, and more temperate climates. The soil here is super fertile and great for farming, all because of the plot twist. Many of the surrounding mountains are actually volcanoes. Volcanoes, while scary, can also be super useful. They've been erupting for millions of years, and when they do that, they mix rich minerals into the soil. They're like natural fertilizer. So the land here is perfect for growing crops, especially calorie-heavy grains like corn. That's why we get so much corn or maize from Mexico. Also, Many volcanic areas have natural hot springs where people can relax and enjoy a warm soak. Finally, mountains help reduce the spread of viruses and insects. This is one of the reasons why Mesoamerica became one of the first cradles of civilization in history. Thousands of years ago, the ancient city of Teotihuacan thrived here. This city reached a population of at least 125,000 people, bigger than Monaco or Liechtenstein. It was one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Back in the days of the Aztec Empire, this area was home to 5 large lakes and many rivers that provided tons of fresh water for farming. Also, people used boats to transport goods. This boosted trading and cultural growth. But living in the mountains still isn't perfect. Only about 12% of Mexico's land is good for farming, so mostly people farm in the central volcanic valleys, where they've lived for centuries. Also, because the elevation is so high, the rivers flow from the mountains to the ocean. Gravity plays its tricks, and the currents accelerate and become stronger. Because of this, there's no cheap river transport between Mexico City and the ocean. The rivers are too dangerous for the ships. Instead, people have to rely on more expensive methods like roads, railways, and airplanes. Veracruz used to be the local star port. It was the only safe and calm place on the Gulf of Mexico. Since it was the only natural harbor for miles along Mexico's flat coastline, it was super important. Not only for locals, but also a hot target for invaders. And while mountains could keep Mexico's heartland kinda safe, protecting coastal areas was harder because of them. Connecting Veracruz to Mexico City was a massive headache. And don't forget that living near volcanoes is still scary. Every now and then they throw temper tantrums and start spewing lava, ash, and smoke everywhere. This is extremely dangerous, so locals have to evacuate to keep everyone safe. One famous volcanic event happened in 1943 with the Paricutin volcano. Imagine a farmer's surprise when a volcano suddenly erupted right in his cornfield. The volcano grew rapidly and buried 2 villages in lava and ash. Most people managed to evacuate in time, but not all of them. Another dramatic event was the eruption of El Chichon in 1982. This eruption was a big surprise and caused a lot of destruction. Finally, there's Popocatépetl volcano. In the Aztec language, this means smoking mountain. People affectionately call it El Popo. This volcano is still active and quite close to Mexico City. El Popo frequently lets off steam and ash, reminding everyone that it's very much alive. And living near El Popo means always being prepared that something might happen. Also, the reason why volcanoes are there is because the local tectonic plates are pretty active. The ground likes to move, which means that earthquakes aren't a rare occasion here either. Well, at least the climate on the Central Strip is nice, so modern construction materials like concrete and asphalt thrive here. Finally, we can build some roads, right? Oops, never mind. Because of the elevation, the locals only managed to build the first railroad in the 19th century. Meanwhile, the US had already built over 50,000 miles of tracks at the time. Can you imagine? Since Mexico is like a jigsaw puzzle of separate valleys, it's very tricky to build roads and railways through the mountains. Basically, there are no cheap ways to move goods in the country. But a few cities found a way to thrive outside the Central Strip. Chihuahua is one of the largest cities in Mexico, and it's doing pretty well. They boast good automotive and electronics industries. That's probably because it's connected to the US border, which really helps trading. Hermosillo is also located in the desert, but luckily it's right near the Gulf of California, so the temperatures aren't that awful. Plus, it helps marine trading. In this city, they even made up some advanced irrigation techniques that make the desert bloom. Also, Hermosillo is a major center for the aerospace industry. However, Mexico City still remains the life center in the country, and it's one of the world's largest megacities, with over 22 million people. But it's hard for the central government in Mexico City to control this puzzle of a country. Trading between the central valleys and the northern deserts or southern jungles is very tough, and supporting the economy may be sort of frustrating.
Consider Lake Enigma. What a fitting name! It's already strange enough because it's not even supposed to exist. But now, we stumbled upon actual life deep beneath it. And this just might help NASA in their search for life in outer space. The lake lies deep in the icy heart of Antarctica, so it's not really a water pool like we're used to, more like a lake-like block of ice, or so we thought. Just recently, Italian scientists discovered a secret that had been buried for ages, an actual body of water, and in this water, life is thriving. Various microorganisms, and even some weird little hunters. Which is super weird, since Enigma sits in a remote and harsh corner of our planet, the northern Victoria Land in Antarctica. The entire South Pole is cold, but in this place, temperatures can plummet to a horrifying minus 41 degrees Fahrenheit, though on average it's around 7. Chilly. Like we said, this lake shouldn't even be there at all. Antarctica is technically the largest desert on Earth, even though it's covered in snow, because it's super dry. There are 0 rains, truly little snowfall, and the sun barely evaporates anything. And even if there is some water, the insane winds make sure to dry everything out super quickly. Putting on our thinking caps, this lake should lose an unimaginable 7 million cubic feet of water every year. Yet, the water remains. Why? No one knows. Scientists say there could be something deep underground that refills it constantly. They just have no idea what that might be. Maybe deep underground rivers, melting ice, or something else entirely. But hence the name, the Enigma Lake. The block of ice we mentioned is permanent and super thick, at least 36 feet of it, and that's higher than a 3-story building. So researchers decided to check out if there's anything beneath it. They used a so-called ground-penetrating radar, a super smart echo detector for the ground. This radar sends invisible radio waves into the Earth. When they hit something underground, like rocks, water, or anything else, they bounce back to the device. By measuring how long it takes for the signal to return and how strong they are, we can determine the distance and what exactly the radar hit. That's how animals like bats, whales, and dolphins can see underwater. And we humans stole this cool nature idea to research buried structures and hidden caves. Scientists used this device all over the Enigma surface. This way, they were able to create an entire map of this under-ice world beneath. The water itself wasn't surprising. It's the unique ecosystem in it that shocked them. Unfortunately, no secret monsters or extraterrestrial secrets this time. But there are microorganisms there that may not exist anywhere else on Earth. Somehow, these creatures have managed to survive in complete isolation and extreme cold. It's not that we don't know these microorganisms, we've met them before, just not exactly like this. There are a couple groups hanging out down there. The first one is Bacteroidota. They love breaking down complex molecules, especially in your stomach, and help digest tough plant fibers. They mostly hang out inside us, but in the outside world, we might occasionally find them in soils and oceans. Then Actinobacteriota, genius chemists among bacteria. They decompose organic materials and help the soil get healthier. They're also famous for producing antibiotics, so we owe a lot of our medicine to them. The third one is Pseudomonadota. These guys weren't a surprise. They're crazy adaptable. They can thrive pretty much anywhere, from soil to water to the human body. Some of them are good, helping plants grow and in nutrient cycles, but others can be opportunistic pathogens. Bad guys. But what is actually a surprise is that Lake Enigma has tons of passibacteria. They're ultra small even for microorganisms and can barely do anything themselves. So they prefer to live in symbiosis or be little parasites, relying on their hosts for nutrients and other necessities. All these little chompers might be ancient. They could be remnants of a time before the lake froze over completely. which is hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's simply weird to encounter these bacteria in the Enigma Lake, especially the little parasites. Paticibacteria usually love low-oxygen environments, but this lake is very oxygen-rich, not even mentioning an almost 40 feet of ice above. So all this means that even though we know who these guys are, this specific species might be new to us. They could have evolved with some unique adaptations and abilities using the lake's unusual chemistry. They probably rely on a super simple and delicate food web. Some of the microorganisms produce energy from light, well, whatever light gets down there, or the lake's chemicals. The symbiosis guys most likely survive by living on or inside their neighbors. Yep, these microscopic creatures hunt each other. Nope, things can't be peaceful even in a place like that. If we find out what their secret to survival is, we might learn more about chemistry, medicine, and even extraterrestrial life. Because if life can endure such extreme conditions, then it can probably appear pretty much anywhere, including our closest neighbors, Europa or Enceladus, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. They definitely hide oceans beneath their frozen surfaces, and now there's a very high chance there might be some life there. Antarctica must be the closest thing we have to extraterrestrial exploration before we actually land on other planets. It's full of hidden mysteries and surprising creatures. Even outside of Lake Enigma, the South Pole harbors life. Just take the McMurdo Dry Valleys, which are often referred to as Earthly Mars. These are among the most mysterious and extreme places on our planet. They're stretching across Victoria Land in Antarctica, and this is one of the driest places on Earth. Makes sense if you remember the name. Surprisingly, unlike other parts of the South Pole, this land is almost entirely devoid of snow and ice, just lots of super cold ground. There might even be some sand dunes nestled here and there between the rugged mountains. The ground is mostly covered in loose gravel, scattered with ancient rocks made of granite, and something interesting called gneiss, just spelled differently. It's the type of rock that's been through a lot, literally. It's usually born when granite and sedimentary rocks have to endure insane pressure or horrifying heat for a while, a process called metamorphism. These conditions are so intense that they literally rearrange the minerals into layers. That's why gneiss has such beautiful foliated looks. It's the planet's version of baking a layered cake. It's amazing because this place is almost exactly the way it was millions of years ago. These valleys are frozen in time, and they give us a little glimpse into Earth's distant past. And that includes life. Once again, local winds are absolutely terrifying gusts of cold air racing downhill, and they evaporate snow faster than it can even melt. So, logically, you shouldn't find much water here, not even mentioning life. But somehow, you can still stumble across frozen lakes and saline ponds in the dry valleys. And local life stretches all reason and our understanding of biology. It exists inside the rocks themselves. Microorganisms are hidden in slightly moist cracks and crevices. Deep inside, there's endolithic bacteria. These guys are super chill. Instead of moving around like other microorganisms, they always stay put inside their little rocky homes. How do they survive? Through photosynthesis. Just like plants, they take teeny tiny parts of light that gets in crevices and acts like little solar panels, getting energy from the sun. Meanwhile, in another place, beneath the Taylor Glacier, there's bacteria that literally doesn't eat anything. Not comfort, not sunlight, not even oxygen. These guys rely on a diet of dusty rocks and sulfur to fuel their weird metabolisms. By breaking down sulfur and iron, they get energy to sustain themselves. This way, they easily survive in deep seas at sub-freezing temperatures, completely cut off from sunlight, oxygen, and the world itself. This place is fascinating for both its life and the lack of it. In some parts of the valleys, like University Valley, yes, that's what it's called, the permafrost is so harsh that no microbes were found at all. This might be one of the only places on Earth where life appears to be completely absent, a quite scary idea. Anyway, now scientists are thinking about learning more about Lake Enigma and drilling this Mars-like environment. Exactly for that reason, to see how we could get samples from Mars in the future.
We've all dreamed of visiting the Arctic and witnessing the natural wonders of polar bears frolicking on ice floes or the aurora borealis dancing across the sky. Well, sorry to break it to you, but you won't find any tourists flocking to Antarctica anytime soon. Why, you may ask? Let's dive into it. First off, where is Antarctica? It's located in the southern hemisphere, specifically at the South Pole. The Southern Ocean surrounds it, and most of the continent is covered by ice, making it one of the most remote and frigid places on Earth. Now, have you ever met someone who's visited Antarctica? Probably not. It's one of the least visited places on the planet, and only a handful of lucky explorers have seen its interior, which is mostly made up of glaciers and ice fields. But trust me when I say the wildlife and scenery are out of this world. Why shouldn't you travel to Antarctica? Well, for starters, the environment is incredibly fragile and can be easily damaged. Plus, there are no native human populations on the continent, so your travels would essentially be like visiting an uninhabited island. And let's not forget that it's also one of the most expensive destinations to travel to. Despite all that, Antarctica is not exactly guarded like a fortress, but there is an international agreement called the Antarctic Treaty. This treaty was negotiated to prevent any unwanted activity on the continent and bans some forms of testing done there by member states. But the primary reason we can't just waltz into Antarctica is that it has a delicate ecosystem that needs protection. The treaty states that Antarctica should be used for peaceful purposes only and should be free from any human activity that could harm the environment. Scientists are still learning about the continent's unique ecosystem, and our activity and machines could disrupt the delicate balance that exists there. If you're still itching to go to Antarctica, getting permission isn't exactly a walk in the park. U.S. citizens, for example, need to complete a special form and send it to the Office of Ocean and Polar Affairs. And once you're there, you'll need to follow some strict guidelines to protect the environment, like not disturbing any wildlife or taking souvenirs like rocks, plants, or animals. Now, technically, can you live in Antarctica? While there are no laws banning people from living there permanently, it's a very inhospitable environment and unsuitable for human habitation. Temperatures can reach -76 degrees Fahrenheit and below, making it nearly impossible for anyone to survive without the proper equipment and experience. Plus, the nearest piece of land is over 1,000 miles away, making any inhabitants completely cut off from the rest of the world. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll get the chance to visit this unique and fascinating continent. But until then, let's admire it from afar. Let's now talk a bit about the discovery of Antarctica. Unlike other places that were already inhabited, Antarctica never had a native human population. Ancient Greek philosophers had an idea about the continent and called it Antarctos, meaning opposite the bear. The bears it refers to are not the polar ones though, but rather the Great and Little Bear constellations, which are only observable in the northern hemisphere. As a result, the term signifies the opposite of the land of the bear. Whaling and sealing voyages in the late 1700s and early 1800s would venture further south when rounding Cape Horn at the tip of South America. It was known that going further south often meant stronger winds, but also the risk of hitting floating ice of all sizes and of winds and seas that could prove dangerous to the ship and crew. Captain James Cook was the first to cross the Antarctic Circle on January 17, 1773, in the Ross Sea region. He reached a point further north a year later, and though he didn't sight land, he came to within 50 miles and saw deposits of rock held in icebergs, indicating that a more southerly land existed. The first sighting of Antarctica is widely acknowledged to have taken place in January of 1820, during the voyage of two ships under the command of Captain Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, as part of a 2-year exploratory expedition around the world to discover new lands. The captain's ships were the first to have crossed the Antarctic Circle since Cook. The first undisputed landing on Antarctica didn't happen until much later, on January 24, 1895, at Cape Adare during the whaling voyage of the ship Antarctic, led by Henrik Bull. A small boat with 6 or possibly 7 men on board rowed ashore during calm conditions. You might not believe it, but Antarctica is actually a desert. With all that ice, you'd think it'd be like a winter wonderland with snowball fights and hot cocoa all day long. When we think of deserts, we picture camels and cacti and people struggling to find water. But in Antarctica, it's a whole different story. The struggle isn't to find water, it's to find anything that's not covered in ice. And the average rainfall has been just over 0.4 inches in the past 30 years. That's like a few drops of rain compared to what we're used to. So technically, it's not the dunes or sizzling heat that makes a desert, well, a desert. It's the lack of precipitation. But don't worry, if you ever find yourself lost in Antarctica, you won't have to worry about getting thirsty. Just make sure you bring a jacket and some mittens, because it's cold enough to make you into a popsicle. Not only is Antarctica one of the driest places on Earth, but it's also the coldest, the windiest, and the highest. Talk about overachieving. The penguins and scientists down in Antarctica have at times found themselves in a bit of a pickle when it comes to time. You see, unlike the rest of us on this big blue planet, there is no Antarctica time zone. All the lines of longitude meet at a single point at the South Pole, making it a bit of a head-scratcher when trying to figure out what time it is. Now, you might be thinking, but how do the scientists and researchers keep track of time down there? Good question. They typically stick to the time zone of the country they departed from. However, with stations from all over the world on the Antarctic Peninsula, things can get a little wacky. Imagine trying to coordinate with your neighboring countries without accidentally waking them up in the middle of the night. You might think that not much could survive in a place where the temperature is extremely cold, the sun barely shows up, and the wind could blow you away faster than a tumbleweed. Well, as in many places on Earth, life found a way in Antarctica too. Believe it or not, this frozen continent is buzzing with activity. It's home to billions of krill, which in turn attract lots of seals and more penguins than you can shake a fish at. But don't let their cute and cuddly appearance fool you. Penguins are the ultimate swimmers, with streamlined bodies that would make Olympic medal winners jealous. They come ashore to breed and chill, but their real talent is stealing pebbles from each other and forming mathematically precise huddles to stay warm. Antarctica is also home to the largest species of penguin on Earth. It's called the emperor penguin. Sure, these creatures are flightless birds, but that doesn't mean they can't jump. In fact, some of them can leap up to 120 inches. And let's not forget about the seals. With their furry bodies and special songs, these marine mammals are protected by the Antarctic Treaty, and they're thriving in the cool waters of the Southern Ocean too. But the real stars of the show are the whales. During the Antarctic summer, these huge creatures show up in droves to chow down on the abundant krill. It's indeed like a whale buffet down there.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.